Welcome, weary traveler, to the hidden sanctuaries where magic itself takes form and ancient wisdom flows like spring water through enchanted groves. Tonight, we journey into the secret world of the great fairies, those magnificent beings who have watched over Hyrule since time immemorial. Here, in their sacred fountains and mystical domains, we'll discover tales of wonder that span countless ages. So settle into comfort, let your breathing slow, and allow yourself to drift into realms where starlight dances with healing magic, and every whispered spell carries the promise of restoration and peace. In the beginning, before memory became legend, and legend became myth, when the world was young and the divine breath of creation still stirred the primordial waters, there existed a connection so pure and fundamental that it formed the very foundation upon which all magic would eventually rest. This was the sacred bond between the goddess Hylia and the ethereal spirits that would one day become known as the Great Fairies, a relationship that transcended the boundaries between the mortal realm and the divine sphere, in ways that even the wisest scholars struggle to comprehend fully. The goddess, in her infinite wisdom and boundless compassion, understood that the world she was shaping would need guardians who could serve as bridges between the divine and the mortal, beings who could channel her healing power and protective grace in ways that would not overwhelm the fragile hearts and minds of those who would one day call Hyrule their home. She saw that there would come times when her direct intervention might be too powerful, too absolute for the delicate work of nurturing growth and fostering hope in the souls of her children. And so, from the very essence of her divine nature, from the purest distillation of her love and compassion, Hylia called forth the first fairy spirits. These were not created as servants or tools, but as partners in the great work of creation, beings who would share in her divine nature while remaining connected to the world in ways that would allow them to understand the struggles and needs of mortal souls with perfect clarity and infinite patience. The first fairies emerged from springs that bubbled up from the deepest places of the earth, where the goddess's power flowed through underground rivers of liquid starlight and crystallized dreams. These sacred waters carried within them the memory of creation itself, the echo of the first word that had brought order from chaos and light from the primordial darkness that had existed before time began its eternal dance. Each fairy that rose from these blessed waters was unique, shaped by the particular aspects of divine love that had called it into being, yet all shared certain fundamental qualities that marked them as children of the goddess. They possessed an understanding of harmony that went beyond mere knowledge, an intuitive grasp of how all things were connected in the great web of existence that bound every living thing to every other in patterns of meaning and purpose that stretched across the cosmos. Their magic was unlike anything that would develop in the ages to come, for while mortal wizards and sages would learn to manipulate the forces of nature through study and practice, fairy magic flowed directly from the source of all power. When a fairy worked her enchantments, she was not commanding the elements or bending reality to her will, but rather inviting the fundamental forces of creation to express themselves through her in ways that brought healing, restoration, and growth wherever they were most needed. This divine magic manifested in countless ways, each one perfectly suited to the needs of the moment and the nature of the soul who required aid. Some fairies found their calling in the healing of physical wounds, their touch able to mend broken bones and close torn flesh with the same ease that spring rain brings life to barren fields. Others specialized in the restoration of magical energy, helping those whose spirits had been depleted by great works of enchantment to reconnect with the sources of power that flowed through all things. But perhaps most importantly, fairy magic possessed the unique ability to heal wounds that could not be seen with mortal eyes. the injuries to the soul that came from loss and betrayal, from fear and despair, from the countless small tragedies that mark every mortal life. A fairy's blessing could restore not just physical strength, but the capacity for hope, not just magical power, but the will to continue fighting against the darkness when all seemed lost and the path forward appeared shrouded in insurmountable shadow. As the ages passed and the world grew more complex, as the first mortal civilizations began to rise and flourish across the face of Hyrule, the most powerful and wise among the fairy spirits began to undergo a transformation that would forever change their relationship with the world they had been created to protect. These exceptional beings, those who had proven themselves capable of understanding and channeling the deepest mysteries of divine love, began to evolve into something greater and more magnificent than their original forms. They became the great fairies, beings of such transcendent beauty and power that mortal eyes could barely comprehend their true nature. Their forms shifted and flowed like living poetry, sometimes appearing as ethereal women of impossible grace and beauty, sometimes manifesting as pure light that seemed to contain within it the essence of every star that had ever shone in the midnight sky. Their voices carried the music of creation itself, able to heal with a whisper or inspire courage with a laugh that rang like silver bells in the morning air. These great fairies established their domains in places where the connection between the mortal world and the divine realm was strongest, locations where the goddess's power flowed most freely, and where the barriers between dimensions were thin enough to allow for easy passage between different levels of reality. They chose springs and fountains, caves and groves, anywhere that water flowed pure and clean, and where the earth itself seemed to pulse with sacred energy. Each great fairy's domain became a sanctuary where the wounded could find healing, where the lost could discover direction, and where those who had forgotten their own worth could be reminded of the divine spark that burned within every living heart. These places existed partially outside normal time and space, accessible to those who truly needed them but hidden from those who might seek to exploit their power for selfish or destructive purposes. The great fairies understood, with the wisdom that comes from sharing in divine nature, that their role was not to solve every problem or remove every challenge from the path of mortal heroes. Instead, they served as sources of support and encouragement, providing the tools and blessings that would allow brave souls to find their own solutions and achieve their own victories. Their gifts were always given freely, without expectation of payment or promise of future service, for they understood that true love cannot be earned or purchased, but must always be offered as a gift. In the earliest days of Hyrule's history, when the kingdom was nothing more than a collection of scattered settlements and wandering tribes, the great fairies established a sacred covenant with those who would one day carry the Triforce, that divine relic that embodied the three fundamental virtues upon which all civilization would eventually rest. This pact was not written in any book or carved upon any stone, but rather inscribed directly upon the fabric of reality itself, woven into the fundamental laws that govern the relationship between the mortal and divine realms. The covenant established that whenever a hero arose who truly embodied the virtues of courage, wisdom, and power, whenever someone appeared who was willing to sacrifice their own comfort and safety for the good of others, the great fairies would provide whatever aid they could offer, without directly interfering in the great struggles that would define each age. They would heal wounds and restore strength, enhance weapons and grant magical abilities, but the actual battles would always be fought by mortal hands guided by mortal hearts filled with divine purpose. This arrangement served both the needs of the world and the nature of the great fairies themselves. For while they possessed power that could easily reshape entire kingdoms, They understood that growth and learning could only come through struggle and choice. To remove all obstacles from the path of heroes would be to rob them of the opportunities for development that would allow them to truly become worthy of the titles and responsibilities they would eventually bear. The early relationships between great fairies and the various races that populated Hyrule were marked by a mutual respect and understanding that would serve as a model for all future interactions. The Hylians, with their natural affinity for magic and their deep connection to the goddess, found it easy to sense the presence of fairy domains and to approach these sacred places with the reverence and humility they deserved. Many of the earliest Hylian settlements were established near known fairy fountains, both for the protection these locations provided and for the healing and guidance that could be found there in times of need. The Gorons, despite their earthy nature and their focus on physical rather than magical pursuits, developed their own special relationship with the great fairies, who made their homes in the volcanic regions of Death Mountain. These fire-touched fairies understood the Goron reverence for strength and craftsmanship, often providing blessings that enhanced the durability of Goron-forged weapons and armor, or granted protection against the most extreme temperatures that even these heat-resistant people occasionally found challenging. The Zora, with their long lifespans and their natural connection to the flowing waters that many fairies called home, became perhaps the closest allies of the great fairies among all the races of Hyrule. Zora nobles often served as guardians and protectors of fairy fountains, their extended lives allowing them to maintain these sacred sites across centuries and to pass down the proper rituals and protocols to each new generation of their people. Even the Gerudo, despite their desert homeland and their warrior culture, found ways to honor and work with the great fairies, who established their domains in the harsh but beautiful landscapes of the far western reaches of the kingdom. These desert fairies understood the strength required to survive in such challenging environments and often granted blessings related to endurance and resilience, helping Gerudo warriors to push beyond normal mortal limits when defending their people or pursuing their sacred duties. The establishment of the first permanent fairy fountains across the land marked a turning point in the relationship between the divine and mortal realms, creating fixed points of light and hope that would endure through all the ages of darkness that were yet to come. Each fountain was more than simply a place where fairies lived, but rather a nexus where multiple dimensions intersected, a doorway between worlds that allowed for the free flow of healing energy and divine blessing. These fountains were not created through any mortal magic or engineering, but rather grew organically from the interaction between a great fairy's essence and the natural features of the landscape she chose to call home. The process could take decades or even centuries to complete, as the fairy's power slowly reshaped the environment around her, calling forth springs where none had existed before, and filling the air with an atmosphere of peace and restoration that could be felt by any sensitive soul who approached. The water in these fountains possessed properties that defied easy explanation, remaining perpetually clear and pure regardless of what pollutants or corrupting influences might affect the surrounding area. It carried within it a concentrated essence of the fairy's own nature, making it capable of healing wounds and curing ailments that would resist any other form of treatment. But more than that, the water served as a medium through which the fairy could extend her consciousness and awareness far beyond the physical boundaries of her domain. Through the network of underground streams that connected each fountain to every other, the great fairies maintained constant communication and mutual support that allowed them to coordinate their efforts and ensure that no part of Hyrule was left without access to their aid. A hero who gained the blessing of one fairy could find that blessing recognized and honored by all others, while threats to any single fountain would quickly become known to the entire community of great fairies and would be met with appropriate responses. The fountains themselves became pilgrimage sites for those seeking healing or guidance, places where the faithful could come to pray and meditate and receive whatever wisdom or comfort the great fairies deemed appropriate to their needs. But these were not destinations for casual tourism or idle curiosity, for the fairies possessed an uncanny ability to judge the intentions and character of any who approached their domains, and those who came with impure motives or selfish desires often found themselves turned away by subtle enchantments that made the fountains impossible to locate or access. As the centuries flowed by like water through cupped hands, as kingdoms rose and fell, and the great cycles of history repeated themselves in patterns both familiar and ever-changing, the great fairies remained constant in their vigil. They watched over the land with eyes that saw beyond the surface of events to the deeper currents of meaning that flowed beneath, understanding that their role was not to prevent tragedy or eliminate struggle, but to ensure that hope would always remain available to those brave enough to seek it. They witnessed the rise of great heroes and the emergence of terrible villains, the founding of mighty cities and their eventual ruin, the birth of new forms of magic, and the corruption of ancient wisdom into instruments of destruction. Through it all, they maintained their commitment to the principles that had guided them since their first emergence from the sacred springs, offering aid to the worthy while remaining true to the fundamental nature that made them who and what they were. The magic they wielded grew stronger and more refined with each passing age, not through any deliberate effort on their part, but as a natural consequence of their deepening understanding of the divine purpose they had been created to serve. They learned new ways to channel the goddess's love and compassion, discovering techniques for healing wounds that went beyond the physical to encompass the spiritual and emotional dimensions of suffering that marked every mortal life. Their domains expanded and evolved as well, becoming not just fountains, but entire pocket dimensions, where time moved differently and the normal laws of physics bent to accommodate the needs of those who sought sanctuary there. Heroes could spend what felt like months recovering from terrible ordeals while only hours passed in the outside world, or receive training and instruction that would normally take years to complete in the space of a single night's rest. And so the great fairies prepared themselves for the great challenges that lay ahead, the trials and tribulations that would test not only their own resolve, but the very foundations upon which the world of Hyrule rested. They knew, with the foresight that comes from sharing in divine nature, that the forces of darkness would grow stronger and more cunning with each passing cycle, that the heroes who arose to face these threats would need every advantage and blessing they could provide. But they also knew that love would always prove stronger than hatred, that hope could never be completely extinguished as long as there remained even one soul willing to believe in the possibility of redemption and renewal. The great fairies stood ready to fulfill their ancient purpose, to serve as bridges between the mortal and divine realms, to offer healing to the wounded and strength to the weary, to ensure that the light of the goddess would never fade from the world she had created and blessed with her eternal love. In the ethereal realms that exist beyond the perception of mortal eyes, where the very air shimmers with possibilities that have no names in any earthly language, there stands a palace of such transcendent beauty that even the most gifted poets would weep at their inability to capture its essence in mere words. This is the domain of the great fairy queen, the sovereign of all fairy kind, whose existence spans the entirety of creation, and whose wisdom encompasses the deepest mysteries of divine love made manifest in forms that can touch and heal the mortal world. The palace itself defies every conventional understanding of architecture and construction, for it was not built by any hands or designed by any mind that operates within the limitations of physical reality. Instead, it grew organically from the Queen's own essence, shaped by her will and sustained by her power, existing simultaneously in multiple dimensions while remaining perfectly stable and coherent in each one. Its walls appear to be crafted from crystallized starlight that has been somehow solidified without losing any of its luminous properties, creating surfaces that glow with their own inner radiance, while remaining as clear and transparent as the purest mountain spring. The towers and spires that rise from the palace's central structure spiral upward in patterns that follow the mathematical harmonies underlying all of creation, their curves and angles corresponding to the music of the spheres that plays eternally through the cosmos. Each tower serves a specific function in the great work of fairy governance, housing the various aspects of the Queen's consciousness that oversee different elements of the natural world and the spiritual development of all living beings. At the very heart of the palace lies the throne room of eternal spring, a vast circular chamber where the seasons themselves come to pay homage to the source of all growth and renewal. Here, the great fairy queen holds court from a throne that appears to be carved from a single enormous pearl, its surface reflecting not light but pure emotion, showing each visitor the deepest truths about themselves and their relationship to the divine purpose that guides all existence. The queen herself exists in a state of perpetual transformation, her appearance shifting and flowing like liquid poetry, as different aspects of her nature come to the forefront, depending on the needs of the moment and the character of those who seek her presence. At times, she appears as a figure of maternal warmth and comfort, her form radiating the kind of unconditional love that can heal even the deepest wounds of the heart. At others, she manifests as a being of terrible beauty and awesome power, her presence making it clear that while her love is infinite, her patience with those who would harm the innocent is decidedly limited. Her hair flows and moves as if it were composed of liquid moonlight mixed with the essence of summer breezes, sometimes appearing silver, sometimes gold, sometimes taking on the deep green of forest depths or the crystal blue of mountain lakes. Within its flowing strands can be seen the reflections of every beautiful thing that has ever existed, from the smallest wildflower blooming in a hidden meadow to the most magnificent sunset that has ever painted the evening sky with colors that have no earthly names. The Queen's eyes hold depths that seem to contain entire universes, galaxies of compassion and understanding that spin slowly through dimensions of meaning that mortal minds can barely begin to grasp. When she looks upon a visitor to her realm, she sees not just their surface appearance or their current circumstances, but the entire history of their soul across all the lives and incarnations they have experienced, the lessons they have learned, and those they have yet to master. The potential that lies dormant within them, waiting for the right moment to bloom into full flower. Her voice, when she chooses to speak in words rather than communicating directly from mind to mind, carries harmonies that resonate in frequencies both audible and inaudible, creating music that can heal trauma, inspire courage, and awaken dormant magical abilities in those whose hearts are pure enough to receive her gifts. The very act of hearing the Queen speak is transformative, leaving visitors forever changed in ways they may not immediately understand, but will gradually recognize as they grow in wisdom and spiritual maturity. The court that surrounds the great fairy queen consists of her most trusted advisors and companions, fairy nobles whose power and wisdom are surpassed only by her own. These are beings who have proven themselves through countless eons of faithful service, who have demonstrated their commitment to the principles of love, healing, and growth that define the essential nature of all true fairy magic. Each member of the court specializes in different aspects of the great work that the Queen oversees, their combined knowledge and abilities forming a perfect complement to her own infinite wisdom. Among the most honored members of this celestial assembly is the Fairy of Memory, whose task it is to preserve the complete history of every soul that has ever sought aid from fairy kind. She maintains vast libraries of crystallized experiences, each one containing not just the facts of what occurred, but the full emotional and spiritual context that gives those events their deeper meaning. When heroes from different ages face similar challenges, it is she who ensures that the lessons learned by their predecessors are available to guide and inspire them, though always in ways that allow for individual growth and personal discovery. The Fairy of Dreams works tirelessly to weave the sleeping visions that help mortals process their experiences and integrate new understanding into their developing consciousness. Her realm exists at the intersection of all sleeping minds, allowing her to create elaborate scenarios that appear to be simple dreams, but are actually carefully crafted teaching tools designed to help each individual overcome their specific fears and limitations. Through her work, heroes often receive the insights and inspiration they need to solve seemingly impossible problems, though they typically wake believing they have simply had particularly vivid dreams, rather than understanding the divine intervention that has actually occurred. Perhaps the most mysterious member of the Queen's inner circle is the Fairy of Time, whose understanding of temporal mechanics allows her to coordinate the activities of great fairies across multiple timelines and alternate realities. She ensures that the blessings and curses, the gifts and the challenges that are part of each hero's journey are properly synchronized with the greater patterns of destiny that weave through all existence. Her work is so subtle and complex that even other fairies rarely understand the full scope of what she accomplishes. But without her constant vigilance, the entire structure of reality might collapse under the weight of paradox and contradiction. The hierarchy that governs fairy society is unlike any mortal system of government or organization, for it is based not on power or wealth or political maneuvering, but on the depth of understanding and the purity of purpose that each individual fairy has achieved. Those who rise to positions of greater responsibility do so not through ambition or competition, but through the natural recognition of their peers, that they have developed the wisdom and compassion necessary to guide others effectively. The process by which lesser fairies are elevated to become great fairies is one of the most sacred and beautiful ceremonies in all existence, a ritual that takes place once in every age when the cosmic forces align in perfect harmony. The candidate must demonstrate not just magical ability, but a profound understanding of the principles that underlie all true power, showing that they can wield incredible forces while never losing sight of the loving purpose that must guide every action. The ceremony itself takes place in the Chamber of Transformation, a space within the Queen's palace, where the boundaries between different levels of reality become so thin as to be almost non-existent. Here, surrounded by representatives from every realm of existence, the candidate undergoes a process of spiritual metamorphosis that literally rebuilds their essence from the ground up, preserving everything that makes them who they are while expanding their capabilities to encompass responsibilities and powers that would overwhelm any unprepared consciousness. The transformation begins with a period of deep meditation during which the candidate must confront and resolve every shadow and limitation within their own nature, healing any wounds or imbalances that might interfere with their ability to channel divine love in its purest form. This process can take what seems like eons of subjective time, though only moments pass in the external world, as the candidate experiences visions and trials that test every aspect of their character and commitment. Once this internal purification is complete, the Queen herself bestows the actual transformation, sharing a portion of her own essence with the candidate and creating the mystical bonds that will forever connect them to the great network of consciousness that links all great fairies across space and time. The new great fairy emerges from this process fundamentally changed, their magical abilities expanded exponentially, while their understanding of the sacred responsibilities they now bear deepens beyond anything they could have imagined in their previous state. Each newly elevated great fairy must then choose the location where they will establish their primary domain, a decision that will shape not only their own destiny, but the fate of everyone who will seek their aid in the ages to come. This choice is made not through personal preference, but through careful attunement to the cosmic forces that determine where their particular gifts and abilities will be most needed, where their presence will create the greatest opportunities for healing and growth among the mortal population. The sacred rituals that bind each great fairy to their chosen domain are ancient beyond memory, their origins lost in the mists of time that shroud the very beginning of creation itself. These ceremonies serve not only to establish the fairies' connection to their new home, but also to create the magical infrastructure that will allow their fountain or grove or cave to serve as a nexus between dimensions, a stable portal through which divine blessing can flow freely into the mortal world. The ritual begins at the moment of perfect celestial alignment, when the stars and planets occupy positions that create optimal conditions for the weaving of new magical bonds. The great fairy, accompanied by representatives of the Queen's court and often by delegates from the mortal races who will benefit from her presence, approaches the chosen location, carrying with her the seed of infinite possibility, a crystallized fragment of pure, creative potential that has been blessed by the Queen herself. As the ceremony unfolds, the great fairy plants this seed at the exact center of what will become her domain, watering it with tears of joy that carry within them the concentrated essence of every moment of happiness and wonder she has ever experienced. The seed immediately begins to grow, not into any ordinary plant, but into a living manifestation of the fairy's own nature, taking a form that reflects both her individual personality and her role in the greater pattern of existence. For some fairies, this growth manifests as a spring that bubbles up from previously dry ground, its waters carrying healing properties that will endure for all eternity. For others, it might be a grove of trees whose leaves never fall and whose branches provide shelter and comfort to any who seek refuge beneath them. Still, others might find their domain taking the form of a crystal formation that grows from the living rock, its faceted surfaces reflecting and amplifying the magical energies that flow through the area. Whatever form the domain takes, it becomes more than simply the fairy's home, evolving into an extension of her consciousness that allows her to perceive and respond to the needs of any who approach with genuine hearts and pure intentions. The domain develops its own protective enchantments, barriers that prevent those with evil intentions from even finding the location, while drawing those who truly need help along paths that lead inevitably to exactly the aid they require. The connection between the great fairy queen and each member of her extended family is maintained through bonds that transcend ordinary space and time, creating a network of consciousness that allows for instant communication and mutual support across any distance. When a great fairy faces a challenge that exceeds her individual capabilities, she can call upon the collective wisdom and power of all her sisters, drawing strength from their combined experience and knowledge to find solutions that no single mind could have discovered alone. This network also serves as a fail-safe system that ensures the continuity of fairy wisdom and magic even in the face of catastrophic threats. Should any great fairy be destroyed or corrupted by dark forces, her essence and all her accumulated knowledge are preserved within the collective consciousness, allowing her to be restored when conditions permit or her vital functions to be distributed among her sisters until such restoration becomes possible. The Queen's connection to the flow of time itself allows her to perceive the broad patterns of destiny that shape the lives of heroes and the fate of kingdoms, understanding not just what is happening in any given moment, but how current events fit into the vast tapestry of cause and effect that stretches across all existence. This knowledge enables her to guide her fairy daughters in their work, helping them understand when to intervene and when to allow events to unfold naturally, when to grant powerful blessings, and when to offer only gentle encouragement. Her palace exists in a state of eternal spring, where the seasons change not according to any external calendar, but in response to the emotional and spiritual needs of her visitors. For a hero carrying the weight of terrible losses, the palace might manifest as a warm summer garden filled with the laughter of children and the songs of birds, offering comfort and reminding them of all the beauty that still exists in the world. For someone struggling with doubt about their own abilities, it might appear as an autumn landscape where the changing leaves demonstrate the beauty that can be found in transformation and the natural cycles of growth and renewal. The stories of heroes who have been granted audience with the great fairy queen are few and precious, for such encounters are reserved for only the most exceptional circumstances and the most extraordinary individuals. These meetings typically occur at crucial turning points in the great cycles of history, moments when the fate of entire civilizations hangs in the balance, and the actions of a single individual will determine whether the forces of light or darkness will prevail. When the hero of time stood at the threshold between childhood and adulthood, struggling to understand the magnitude of the destiny that had been placed upon his shoulders, it was the Queen who appeared to him in a vision that seemed like a dream but carried the full weight of prophetic truth. She showed him glimpses of the future that awaited, both the triumphs he would achieve and the sacrifices he would be called upon to make, preparing his heart for the trials ahead while assuring him that he would never face them truly alone. The hero of Winds. When he found himself overwhelmed by the vast emptiness of the great sea and the apparent impossibility of his quest to save his sister and restore hope to his flooded world, was granted a vision of the Queen's palace where he learned that even the greatest disasters carry within them the seeds of renewal and rebirth. Through her wisdom, he came to understand that his journey across the endless waters was not a punishment but an opportunity, a chance to forge new connections and discover new forms of courage that had never before been needed. When the hero of Twilight struggled with the darkness that threatened to consume not only his world but his own soul, the Queen appeared to him in the form of a gentle light that penetrated even the deepest shadows, reminding him that no curse is stronger than the love that binds all living things together in the great web of existence. Her blessing enabled him to face his own shadow self and emerge victorious, not by destroying the darkness within him, but by learning to integrate it into a larger understanding of what it means to be truly whole. Each of these encounters, and the precious few others that have occurred throughout history, share certain common elements that reveal the Queen's approach to guiding heroes through their most difficult challenges. She never simply solves their problems for them, understanding that growth comes only through struggle, and that victories earned through one's own effort carry far more meaning than gifts received without cost. Instead, she provides the perspective and understanding they need to find their own solutions, along with the inner strength required to implement those solutions regardless of the personal price they might have to pay. The Queen's influence extends far beyond these direct encounters, however, reaching into every corner of existence through the work of her fairy daughters and the countless small acts of kindness and healing they perform each day. Every blessing granted at a fairy fountain carries with it a fragment of her consciousness. Every magical enhancement reflects her understanding of what each individual hero truly needs to fulfill their destined role in the great pattern of existence. Her wisdom shapes the very nature of fairy magic itself, ensuring that it remains forever aligned with the principles of love and healing rather than power and domination. Under her guidance, no great fairy has ever been corrupted by the forces of darkness. No fairy blessing has ever been turned to evil purposes, and no fairy domain has ever become a source of harm rather than help for those who seek sanctuary there. The eternal nature of the Queen's vigil means that she has witnessed the rise and fall of countless civilizations, the birth and death of heroes beyond number, the endless cycle of corruption and renewal that marks the passage of ages in the world below. Through all of this, her compassion has never wavered. Her commitment to the principles of love and healing has never been shaken, and her faith in the ultimate triumph of light over darkness has never been diminished. She understands, with the perfect clarity that comes from existing outside the normal flow of time, that every apparent defeat is simply a temporary setback. Every tragedy contains within it the potential for greater joy, and every ending is simultaneously a new beginning that opens possibilities that could never have existed before. This understanding allows her to comfort her fairy daughters when they despair over their inability to prevent suffering, reminding them that their role is not to eliminate pain from the world, but to ensure that healing is always available to those who seek it with sincere hearts. The Great Fairy Queen stands as the ultimate guardian of hope itself, the final guarantee that no matter how dark the world might become, no matter how completely the forces of evil might seem to triumph, there will always remain a source of light and love that no darkness can extinguish. Her very existence serves as a promise to all creation that compassion will endure, that healing is always possible, and that the divine purpose that underlies all existence will ultimately be fulfilled through the patient work of countless souls who choose love over hatred, hope over despair, and service over selfishness. In the quiet moments between great crises, when the world enjoys brief periods of peace and prosperity, the Queen uses these intervals to strengthen the bonds that hold fairy society together and to prepare for the challenges that her foresight tells her are yet to come. She works tirelessly to deepen the understanding of her fairy daughters, sharing with them new techniques for healing and new ways to channel divine love that will be needed to meet threats that have not yet manifested, but whose shadows she can already perceive on the horizon of possibility. Her court becomes a center of learning and preparation during these peaceful interludes, as fairies from across all dimensions gather to share their experiences and learn from one another's successes and failures. The knowledge that flows through these exchanges is then disseminated throughout the entire network of great fairies, ensuring that the wisdom gained in one realm becomes available to aid heroes in all other realms as well. And so the Great Fairy Queen maintains her eternal watch, surrounded by her court of devoted servants and connected through bonds of love to every fairy who has ever been elevated to greatness. Her palace stands as a beacon of hope that can be seen by any soul pure enough to perceive its radiance, while her wisdom guides the healing work that continues without pause in every corner of creation where suffering exists and restoration is needed. Deep within the hidden places of Hyrule, where mortal maps hold no meaning and ordinary eyes perceive only empty wilderness or barren stone, there exist sanctuaries of such profound beauty and power that they seem to have been borrowed from the dreams of the goddess herself. These are the great fairy fountains, sacred springs that serve as bridges between the mortal realm and the infinite dimensions of divine love, places where the very fabric of reality becomes thin enough to allow for miracles that defy all conventional understanding of what is possible within the laws of nature. Each fountain is far more than a simple body of water, though the springs themselves possess properties that seem to mock every principle of physics and chemistry that mortal scholars have ever attempted to catalogue. The water that bubbles up from these blessed sources remains eternally pure and clear, untouched by any pollutant or corruption that might affect the surrounding landscape. Its crystalline depths, reflecting not just the images of those who gaze into them, but the deepest truths of their souls laid bare for any who possess the wisdom to read such revelations. The liquid itself carries within its molecular structure the concentrated essence of healing and renewal, each drop containing enough restorative power to mend wounds that conventional medicine would declare hopeless, to cure ailments that have no names in any earthly language, and to restore vigor to bodies that have been pushed beyond every reasonable limit of endurance. Yet this physical healing, miraculous as it might seem to those who witness its effects, represents only the most superficial manifestation of the fountain's true power. The mystical properties that distinguish great fairy fountains from any other water source in existence stem from their function as nexus points where multiple dimensions intersect in perfect harmony. These locations exist simultaneously in the mortal world and in several layers of spiritual reality, their presence creating stable portals through which divine energy can flow freely from its source, in the realm of the goddess, to the material plane where heroes struggle against the forces of darkness and despair. The selection of these sacred locations follows principles that transcend mortal understanding of geography or geology, for the great fairies who establish their domains in such places are guided by perceptions that operate on frequencies far beyond the range of normal senses. They seek out sites where the Earth's own spiritual energy rises closest to the surface, where ancient ley lines converge in patterns of power that have existed since the world's creation, and where the natural beauty of the landscape reflects the harmony and perfection that characterize the divine realm itself. Some fountains emerge in forest clearings where the trees grow in perfect circles, their branches intertwining overhead to create natural cathedrals filled with light that filters through leaves in patterns too beautiful to be accidental. The fairy who claims such a place often finds her domain expanding to encompass the entire grove, her consciousness flowing through root and branch until every tree becomes an extension of her awareness, and every leaf carries the potential to bestow blessing upon those who shelter beneath them. Others appear in mountain valleys where streams converge from multiple directions, the confluence of waters creating sacred geometry that channels and amplifies the magical forces flowing through the region. These high-altitude sanctuaries often become refuges for heroes undertaking the most perilous quests, offering respite and restoration at altitudes where the air itself seems to carry whispers of divine encouragement, and where the proximity to the heavens makes prayer and meditation more potent than anywhere else on Earth. Deep cavern systems carved by underground rivers sometimes house the most mysterious and powerful of all fairy fountains, their chambers decorated with crystal formations that have grown for millennia under the influence of concentrated magical energies. These subterranean sanctuaries exist in a state of perpetual twilight, illuminated by the soft radiance of the fountains themselves, creating an atmosphere of profound peace and contemplation that allows visitors to connect with aspects of their own nature that remain hidden in the harsh light of ordinary consciousness. The process by which great fairies choose their sacred locations is one of the most beautiful and profound rituals in all existence, a ceremony of mutual recognition between immortal consciousness and the living spirit of the earth itself. When a newly elevated great fairy begins her search for a domain, she enters a state of deep meditation that opens her awareness to the subtle currents of power that flow through every corner of the natural world, following these streams of energy like a river, seeking the sea, until she finds the place where her own essence resonates in perfect harmony with the fundamental frequencies of creation. This process can take years or even decades to complete, for the fairy must be absolutely certain that she has found the location where her gifts and abilities will serve the greatest good for the longest period of time. She must consider not only the immediate needs of the current age, but also the challenges that future generations of heroes will face, ensuring that her fountain will provide exactly the right combination of healing, guidance, and magical enhancement that will be required by souls she has not yet met, but whose struggles she can perceive through the threads of destiny that weave through all existence. When the perfect location has been identified, the establishment of the fountain requires a ritual of such complexity and beauty that witnessing it would fundamentally change the understanding of any mortal fortunate enough to observe the process. The great fairy begins by calling upon the elemental spirits that govern the forces of earth, air, fire, and water, requesting their cooperation in the great work of creating a permanent sanctuary where divine love can take physical form and manifest its healing power in ways that will endure for all eternity. The earth spirits respond by reshaping the landscape itself, moving vast quantities of soil and stone with the gentle patience of geological time compressed into moments, creating the perfect topographical conditions for the fountain's emergence. Hills rise and valleys form according to patterns of sacred geometry that optimize the flow of magical energy while creating natural amphitheaters where the fairies' blessings can be received by multiple visitors simultaneously without any interference or diminishment of power. The water spirits call forth springs from the deepest aquifers, drawing up liquid that has been purified by its passage through layers of sacred minerals and blessed by its contact with the bones of ancient dragons and the crystallized tears of heroes long dead. This water emerges not as a simple upwelling but as an artesian fountain whose flow follows the rhythm of the fairy's own heartbeat, creating music in liquid form that carries melodies capable of healing trauma that has been embedded in the soul across multiple lifetimes. Air spirits weave currents and breezes that carry the fountain's healing influence far beyond its immediate vicinity, ensuring that even those who cannot physically reach the sanctuary can still benefit from its presence through pollen and moisture that bear microscopic amounts of the blessed water to distant communities. These gentle winds also serve as messengers, carrying prayers and requests for aid from the desperate and suffering to the fairy's consciousness, allowing her to respond even when direct visitation is impossible. The fire spirits contribute their own unique gifts to the fountain's creation, not through flame or heat, but through the vital energy that animates all living things and connects every soul to the divine source from which it originally emerged. Their participation ensures that the fountain's waters will not simply heal physical ailments, but will also restore the spiritual fire that gives meaning and purpose to existence, rekindling hope in hearts that have been darkened by despair, and reigniting the courage needed to face seemingly impossible challenges. Once the physical foundation has been prepared through this elemental collaboration, the Great Fairy herself provides the final and most crucial element by opening her own heart completely and allowing her essence to flow into the fountain, creating a permanent connection that will endure as long as her consciousness exists. This act of ultimate vulnerability and generosity transforms the spring from a mere magical artifact into a living extension of the fairy's own being, imbued with her personality, her wisdom, and her infinite capacity for love. The magical barriers that protect fairy domains from corruption and interference operate according to principles that combine divine mandate with natural law, creating defenses that are simultaneously absolute and completely undetectable to those they exclude. These protections do not manifest as visible walls or obvious impediments, but rather as subtle influences that affect the thoughts and perceptions of potential intruders, making them forget their original intentions or become distracted by other concerns that lead them away from the sanctuary without ever realizing they have been redirected. Those who approach with genuine need and pure intentions find themselves guided along paths that seem to appear spontaneously beneath their feet, routes that lead through landscapes of increasing beauty and tranquility, until they arrive at the fountain, feeling as though they have completed a pilgrimage of spiritual purification. The journey itself becomes part of the healing process, allowing visitors to shed the accumulated stress and negativity of their ordinary lives before they encounter the full power of fairy magic. The barriers also serve to filter out negative emotions and malicious thoughts, creating zones of perfect peace where anger and hatred cannot take root, and where despair withers away like darkness before the dawn. Heroes who enter these sanctuaries often find that problems which seemed insurmountable in the outside world become manageable when viewed from the perspective of divine love, while conflicts that appeared to have no solution reveal new possibilities when approached with the clarity and wisdom that fairy domains naturally inspire. Seasonal changes affect each great fairy fountain in ways that reflect both the natural cycles of the earth and the spiritual rhythms that govern the flow of divine power throughout creation. During the spring months, when life force surges through every growing thing and the world celebrates its annual resurrection from winter's apparent death, the fountains pulse with especially potent energies of renewal and rebirth, their waters taking on properties that can heal not just current injuries but also the lingering effects of ancient traumas. Summer brings a time of abundance and strength, when the fountains radiate power that enhances physical capabilities and grants courage to those who must face great dangers in defense of the innocent. The water during these months carries within it the concentrated essence of solar energy transformed into liquid form, providing sustenance that can keep a hero fighting long past the point where normal endurance would fail, while simultaneously protecting against the corrupting influences that seek to turn noble intentions towards selfish ends. Autumn's approach signals a season of wisdom and preparation, when the fountains become repositories of knowledge and understanding accumulated over countless ages of experience. Heroes who visit during these months often receive insights and revelations that prepare them for challenges they have not yet encountered, while the fountain's waters grant enhanced perception that allows them to see through deceptions and illusions that might otherwise lead them astray from their righteous paths. Winter transforms the fountains into sanctuaries of contemplation and inner healing, places where heroes can retreat from the external battles that define their lives and turn their attention to the spiritual work of understanding their true nature and purpose. The waters during this season possess properties that facilitate deep meditation and prophetic dreams, allowing visitors to receive guidance directly from the divine realm, through visions that illuminate the deeper meaning behind their struggles and sacrifices. The symbiotic relationship between each great fairy and her chosen environment creates a web of mutual support and enhancement that benefits not only the fairy herself, but every living thing within the expanded boundaries of her domain. The plants that grow near fairy fountains develop properties found nowhere else in nature, their leaves and flowers gaining the ability to provide healing and magical enhancement to any who know how to prepare and use them properly. Trees blessed by fairy presence often grow to enormous size and age, their branches providing shelter that offers more than mere protection from the elements. Those who rest beneath such trees find their dreams filled with peaceful visions, and their waking thoughts clarified by contact with consciousness that has been touched by divine love. The fruit from these blessed trees possesses nutritional and medicinal properties that far exceed anything that normal agriculture could produce, providing sustenance that nourishes not just the body, but the soul as well. Animals that make their homes within fairy domains undergo their own forms of transformation, becoming more intelligent and empathetic than their cousins in the outside world while retaining all their natural instincts and abilities. These creatures often serve as guardians and guides for the Fairies' sanctuary, helping lost travelers find their way to healing, while discouraging those whose intentions might disrupt the peace that defines these sacred spaces. The mineral deposits found in areas surrounding great fairy fountains frequently develop unique properties that make them invaluable for the crafting of magical items and enhanced weapons. Metals extracted from such locations hold enchantments better than any material found elsewhere, while gems and crystals grown under fairy influence become focusing elements that can amplify and direct magical energies with unprecedented precision and power. Throughout the long ages of Hyrule's history, certain fairy fountains have become the subject of legends and stories that are told around campfires and in royal courts alike, tales of miraculous healings and impossible transformations that challenge every assumption about the limits of what fairy magic can accomplish. These stories, while often embellished by countless retellings, preserve the memory of genuine miracles that serve as testament to the incredible power that flows through these sacred sanctuaries. One such legend tells of a fountain hidden deep in the Lost Woods, a place where time itself flows differently and where heroes who have been mortally wounded can be healed so completely that they emerge stronger and more capable than they were before their injuries. This fountain is said to be presided over by a great fairy whose understanding of the healing arts surpasses that of all others, a being who can restore not just physical form, but also memories that have been lost and abilities that have been diminished by trauma or magical interference. Another tale speaks of a mountain fountain whose waters can grant temporary invulnerability to those pure enough of heart to receive such a blessing, protection that lasts just long enough for a hero to complete a single crucial task that would otherwise be impossible to survive. The fairy who guards this sanctuary is described as a being of terrible beauty and awesome power, one who appears only to those who have already demonstrated their willingness to sacrifice everything in service of others. Perhaps the most mysterious of all legendary fountains is said to exist in a place that can only be reached by those who have already died in service to others, but whose work remains unfinished. This sanctuary supposedly exists at the boundary between life and death, presided over by a great fairy who has the power to restore heroes to life when their continued existence is essential for the salvation of the world. The stories claim that this fountain appears only during the darkest hours, when hope has nearly died and evil seems destined to triumph over all that is good and beautiful in creation. These legends, whether they describe fountains that still exist or sanctuaries that have been lost to the mists of time, serve an important function in maintaining the faith and determination that heroes need to continue their struggles against seemingly overwhelming odds. They remind all who hear them that no sacrifice made in love is ever truly wasted, that healing is always possible no matter how severe the wound, and that the divine realm continues to take active interest in the affairs of mortals who strive to serve purposes greater than their own comfort and safety. The great fairy fountains stand as eternal monuments to the principle that love is indeed the most powerful force in all creation, capable of overcoming any obstacle and healing any wound when properly understood and applied. They serve as reminders that the divine realm has not abandoned the mortal world to struggle alone against the forces of darkness, but continues to provide sanctuary and support for all who seek to walk the path of righteousness, regardless of how difficult or dangerous that path might become. In their waters flows the concentrated essence of every prayer that has ever been offered in sincere faith, every tear that has ever been shed in genuine sorrow for the suffering of others, and every moment of joy that has ever been experienced in recognition of the beauty and wonder that permeate all existence when viewed through eyes that have been opened to perceive divine love in all its infinite manifestations. In the time when darkness first crept across the land of Hyrule like a shadow cast by malevolent stars, when the innocent child who would become known as the hero of time first drew breath in the hidden sanctuary of the Kokiri forest, 4 great fairies established their domains in locations that seemed chosen by fate itself to serve the greatest hero their age would ever know. These magnificent beings, each possessed of wisdom, accumulated across countless centuries and power that flowed directly from the source of all divine love, prepared themselves for the role they would play in the epic struggle between light and shadow that would define not just one lifetime, but the eternal cycle of heroism that runs like a golden thread through all of history. The great fairy of power made her domain in the depths of Death Mountain, where the very earth pulsed with the primal forces of creation and destruction, where molten rock flowed like liquid starlight, and the air itself shimmered with energies that could forge the strongest metals or reduce the mightiest fortresses to ash and memory. Her fountain emerged from a natural amphitheater carved by volcanic forces over countless ages, its walls decorated with veins of precious metals that had been transformed by her presence into conduits for magical energy that hummed with barely contained potential. This fairy appeared to mortal eyes as a being of terrible beauty whose form seemed to be composed of living flame that never consumed but only illuminated and empowered. Her hair flowed like streams of molten gold, while her eyes burned with the intensity of forge fires that had been fed with meteoric iron and the dreams of master craftsmen. When she spoke, her voice carried harmonics that resonated in frequencies both heard and felt, creating vibrations that could strengthen steel or shatter crystal, depending on the intentions behind her words. Her specialty lay in the enhancement of physical capabilities and the improvement of weapons and armor through the application of divine fire that purified rather than destroyed. Heroes who gained her blessing found their strength increased beyond normal mortal limits, their endurance expanded to allow them to fight tirelessly against overwhelming odds, and their courage fortified against any fear or despair that enemies might attempt to instill in their hearts. More than mere physical enhancement, her gifts carried within them the understanding that true power comes not from the ability to dominate others, but from the strength to protect those who cannot protect themselves. The magical forge that occupied the heart of her domain was a marvel of divine craftsmanship, its flames burning with colors that had no earthly names, and its anvil carved from a single massive ruby that had formed in the depths of the mountain over millions of years. When she worked at this forge, reshaping weapons and armor brought to her by worthy heroes, the sound of her hammer striking metal created music that could be heard throughout the mountain, melodies that spoke of dedication and sacrifice, of the patient work required to transform raw potential into perfected reality. The great fairy of courage established her sanctuary in the frozen wastes of the far north, where howling winds carried the whispers of ancient heroes, and the aurora danced across skies so clear they seemed like windows into the realm of the divine. Her fountain emerged from an ice cave whose walls had been carved by her own magic into shapes that told the story of every act of heroism that had ever been performed in defense of the innocent, creating a gallery of crystalline sculptures that captured not just the appearance of legendary figures, but the essence of the noble spirit that had driven them to greatness. This fairy manifested as a being of ethereal grace whose form seemed to be woven from winter starlight and crystallized courage, her presence radiating the kind of calm certainty that comes only from absolute faith in the ultimate triumph of good over evil. Her garments appeared to be cut from fabric made of aurora light, shifting and flowing through spectrums of color that reflected the emotional state of whoever gazed upon her, showing them reflections of their own hidden strengths and unrealized potential for heroic action. Her gift to worthy heroes was the blessing of unshakable resolve, the ability to maintain hope and determination, even in the face of seemingly impossible odds and overwhelming despair. Those who received her benediction found their spirits protected against the corruption and fear that evil forces sought to spread, while their hearts were filled with the understanding that every act of courage, no matter how small it might seem, contributes to the great work of pushing back the darkness that constantly threatens to engulf all that is beautiful and good in creation. The trials she set for those who sought her aid were not tests of physical prowess or magical ability, but examinations of character and commitment, challenges that required heroes to demonstrate their willingness to sacrifice personal comfort and safety in service of higher principles. Some who approached her sanctuary found themselves confronting illusions of their deepest fears, forced to face the shadows within their own hearts before they could prove themselves worthy of her blessing. Others encountered scenarios where they could achieve easy victory through morally questionable means, their choices revealing whether they possessed the integrity necessary to walk the path of true heroism. In the deepest chamber of her domain stood the mirror of true sight, a surface that reflected not physical appearance but the actual condition of the soul, showing visitors exactly where they stood in their spiritual development and what obstacles still needed to be overcome before they could fulfill their destined purpose. Many heroes found this revelation overwhelming, but those who possessed genuine courage used the mirror's insights as guidance for the inner work they needed to accomplish, understanding that external battles could never be truly won until the conflicts within their own hearts had been resolved. The great fairy of wisdom made her home in the heart of an ancient forest where the oldest trees in Hyrule grew in perfect spirals that followed mathematical patterns discovered by mystics who had spent lifetimes studying the underlying structures of reality itself. Her fountain was surrounded by groves where every species of healing herb and magical plant known to exist could be found growing in abundance, their properties enhanced by her presence, until even the most common flowers possessed the power to cure ailments that would baffle the greatest physicians. This fairy appeared as a being whose beauty transcended physical form, her presence creating an atmosphere of profound peace and contemplation that allowed visitors to think more clearly and perceive connections between seemingly unrelated phenomena with startling clarity. Her eyes held depths that seemed to contain entire libraries of accumulated knowledge, while her voice carried overtones that could communicate complex philosophical concepts directly to the understanding without the need for words or lengthy explanations. Her specialty was the enhancement of magical abilities and the deepening of spiritual insight, gifts that she bestowed only upon those who demonstrated genuine wisdom rather than mere cleverness or magical talent. Heroes who received her blessing found their connection to the divine realm strengthened until they could perceive the subtle currents of power that flow through all existence, while their understanding of the deeper meaning behind their struggles expanded until they could see how every challenge they faced contributed to their spiritual growth and the greater good of all creation. The sacred library that occupied the central chamber of her domain contained volumes that existed nowhere else in the mortal realm, books whose pages held not words but living thoughts that communicated directly with readers who possessed sufficient wisdom to comprehend their contents. Some of these tomes recorded the complete history of every soul that had ever sought enlightenment, while others contained prophecies of future events that would only be revealed to those who needed such knowledge to fulfill their destined roles in the great pattern of existence. Most mysterious of all was the Book of Infinite Possibilities, a volume whose pages showed different content to each reader based on their individual needs and level of spiritual development. Heroes who consulted this tome often discovered solutions to problems they had not yet encountered, insights that would prove crucial during trials they could not imagine, and understanding that would sustain them through periods of doubt and despair that lay somewhere in their unknown future. The fourth member of this sacred sisterhood was the great fairy of magic herself, whose domain existed partially outside normal space and time, in a realm that could only be accessed by those who possessed both sufficient magical ability and the pure heart necessary to perceive realities beyond the physical world. Her fountain served as a nexus point where multiple dimensions intersected, creating a space where the impossible became routine and where the fundamental forces of creation could be observed and studied in their raw, unfiltered form. This fairy appeared to mortal perception as a being of constantly shifting beauty, whose form reflected the infinite diversity of magical expression throughout the cosmos. Sometimes she manifested as a figure of classical elegance, whose every gesture created new spells and enchantments, while at other times she took the form of pure energy that communicated through direct transmission of knowledge and power, rather than through any medium that ordinary senses could interpret. Her gift to worthy heroes was the deep understanding of magic itself, not merely as a collection of spells and techniques to be memorized and practiced, but as a fundamental aspect of existence that connected all things in webs of meaning and purpose that stretched across every dimension of reality. Those who received her blessing discovered that their magical abilities were not separate from their other qualities, but integral parts of their essential nature, expressions of their soul's unique relationship to the divine source from which all power ultimately flows. The process by which she bestowed her gifts was perhaps the most complex and demanding of all fairy ceremonies, requiring recipients to undergo a complete transformation of consciousness that allowed them to perceive magic as the goddess herself perceives it. This initiation could take place over what felt like years of subjective time, while only moments passed in the external world, as the hero experienced visions and revelations that revealed the true nature of reality and their own role in the eternal struggle between creation and destruction. When the child Link first began his legendary journey, guided by prophecy and protected by destiny, but still struggling to understand the magnitude of the task that had been placed upon his young shoulders, it was the wisdom of these four great fairies that provided him with the foundation he would need to grow from an innocent forest child into the hero whose name would echo through all the ages to come. Each fairy recognized in him the soul they had been waiting to serve, the individual whose pure heart and indomitable courage made him worthy of gifts that could reshape the very fabric of reality. The sequence in which Link encountered these magnificent beings was not determined by chance or convenience, but followed a careful pattern designed to ensure that his development proceeded in the proper order, each blessing building upon the previous ones, to create a harmony of abilities that no enemy could overcome and no challenge could defeat. The fairies themselves coordinated their efforts across dimensional barriers, their consciousness linked in ways that allowed them to share the wisdom gained from each interaction and to adjust their guidance based on his evolving needs and growing understanding. His first encounter with the Great Fairy of Power came at a time when his physical capabilities were still those of a child despite the adult form he had been granted by the Master Sword, a discrepancy that left him vulnerable to enemies whose strength far exceeded anything he had previously faced. The fairy's blessing not only enhanced his physical abilities but also taught him the deeper truth that real strength comes from the willingness to use power in service of others rather than for personal gain or glory. The transformation that occurred during this encounter was both physical and spiritual, as the fairy's magic flowed through every fiber of his being and awakened potential that had been dormant since his birth. Link emerged from her fountain feeling as though he had been reborn, his body now capable of feats that would have seemed impossible before, while his spirit carried the absolute certainty that no force of darkness could ultimately prevail against love that was willing to sacrifice everything in defense of the innocent. His meeting with the great fairy of courage came during a period when the weight of his destiny threatened to crush his still developing sense of self, when the knowledge of all the lives depending on his success created pressure that might have broken a lesser soul. Her blessing provided him with the emotional strength he needed to carry such tremendous responsibility, while her wisdom helped him understand that courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision to act rightly despite being afraid. The trials she set for him were designed not to test abilities he already possessed, but to awaken qualities that would be needed for challenges he had not yet encountered. Through visions and simulated experiences, she showed him glimpses of the darkness he would need to face, the losses he would be required to endure, and the sacrifices that would be demanded of him before his quest could reach its victorious conclusion. His encounter with the great fairy of wisdom occurred at the crucial moment when raw power and courage needed to be balanced with understanding and insight, when his growing abilities required the guidance of deep knowledge to be used most effectively. Her blessing opened his mind to perceptions that had been beyond his reach, allowing him to see the subtle connections between events and to understand the deeper meaning behind the trials he was enduring. Under her tutelage, Link began to comprehend the true nature of the Triforce and his relationship to the eternal cycle of heroism that connected him to champions of ages past and future. He learned to see beyond the surface appearance of his enemies to the corruption and pain that had transformed them from their original noble natures. Understanding developing within him the compassion that would allow him to defeat evil without becoming evil himself. The final encounter with the great fairy of magic completed his transformation from a brave child into a true hero worthy of legend, as she granted him access to powers that existed at the very foundations of reality itself. Her blessing allowed him to perceive the magical forces that flow through all existence and to work with these energies as naturally as breathing, his spells and enchantments becoming expressions of his will rather than external techniques he needed to consciously control. More importantly, she helped him understand that the magic he wielded was not separate from his other qualities, but was instead the natural expression of a soul that had been purified through trial and dedication until it could serve as a perfect conduit for divine will. This realization transformed every aspect of his subsequent adventures, as he no longer saw himself as someone using magical tools to accomplish his goals, but as someone whose entire being had become a magical instrument through which the goddess herself could act in the mortal world. Each of these transformative encounters was witnessed and celebrated by the other great fairies, their shared consciousness, allowing them to experience vicariously the joy and satisfaction that comes from successfully nurturing a soul toward its full potential. They understood that Link's victories were not just his own accomplishments, but reflections of their success as teachers and guides, proof that their patient work across countless ages had prepared them to serve their purpose when the moment of greatest need arrived. The legacy of their service to the hero of time would resonate through all subsequent ages, for the pattern they established in their relationship with Link became the template for how great fairies would interact with heroes in all the dark times yet to come. They demonstrated that the most powerful magic is not that which overwhelms enemies through force, but that which transforms allies through love, preparing them to achieve victories that no amount of external power could accomplish alone. Their fountains became pilgrimage sites for later heroes who sought to understand the source of Link's legendary abilities, though few possessed the purity of heart necessary to receive the same depth of blessing that had been granted to the hero of time. Nevertheless, each visitor carried away some measure of their grace, some fragment of their wisdom that would help them in their own struggles against the forces of darkness and despair. In the quiet moments between their great works, when no heroes required their immediate attention and the world enjoyed brief interludes of peace, These four great fairies would gather in consciousness, if not in physical form, to share memories of their time with Link and to prepare for the next incarnation of heroism that their foresight told them would inevitably be needed. They understood that their service to one hero was actually service to the eternal principle of heroism itself, contributions to a legacy that would inspire courage and hope for as long as the world endured, and souls still struggled to choose light over darkness in the endless dance of existence. The nature of fairy blessings transcends every mortal understanding of magic and enchantment, for these gifts emerge not from the manipulation of elemental forces or the recitation of ancient formulae, but from the direct transmission of divine love transformed into tangible power that can reshape both the recipient and the world around them in ways that honor the deepest principles of creation itself. When a great fairy bestows her blessing upon a worthy hero, she is not simply granting access to supernatural abilities, but is fundamentally altering the very essence of their being, weaving threads of divine light into the fabric of their soul until they become living conduits through which the goddess herself can work her will in the mortal realm. These transformations operate on multiple levels simultaneously, affecting not just the physical capabilities of the blessed individual, but their mental, emotional, and spiritual development as well, creating changes so profound and comprehensive that they reshape every aspect of how the hero perceives and interacts with the world. The process begins the moment the fairy's magic makes contact with the recipient's life force, penetrating through every barrier and defense to reach the core of their being, where the spark of divine potential has waited since birth to be awakened by exactly this kind of loving intervention. The most immediately noticeable effects manifest in the realm of physical enhancement, as the fairy's blessing flows through muscle and bone, nerve and sinew, transforming mortal flesh into something that approaches the perfection of divine creation without losing the essential humanity that makes heroism meaningful. Recipients find their strength increased far beyond normal limits, their bodies capable of feats that would seem impossible to ordinary mortals. Yet this enhanced power comes with an intuitive understanding that such abilities are gifts to be used in service of others, rather than tools for personal aggrandizement or dominance. The enhancement of endurance allows blessed heroes to continue fighting long past the point where normal exhaustion would force surrender, their bodies sustained by reserves of divine energy that seem to replenish themselves through acts of courage and selfless dedication. This supernatural stamina proves crucial during the extended battles that define legendary adventures, enabling heroes to persist through conflicts that might last for hours or even days without rest, their resolve never wavering because their physical capabilities remain constant regardless of how long the struggle continues. Perhaps most importantly, fairy blessings carry with them a form of spiritual protection that shields the recipient against the corrupting influences that constantly seek to turn noble intentions towards selfish ends. Heroes who have received such benedictions find themselves immune to the whispers of temptation that lead lesser souls astray, their hearts fortified against despair, and their minds clarified so that they can perceive the difference between true justice and mere vengeance, between necessary action and unnecessary cruelty, between the path of light and the seductive shadows that promise easier victories at the cost of moral compromise. The mystical process of transformation magic represents perhaps the most profound manifestation of fairy power, the ability to fundamentally alter the nature of reality itself in ways that serve the greater good, while honoring the free will and essential dignity of every soul involved. When the great fairy of magic granted the hero of time the ability to move between his adult and child forms at will, she was not simply providing him with a useful tool, but was demonstrating the deeper truth that identity exists on levels far beyond physical appearance or temporal circumstance. This transformation worked by creating a stable connection between different states of being that normally exist separately in the flow of time, allowing the hero to access the unique strengths and perspectives available to each phase of his existence without losing the continuity of memory and purpose that defined his essential self. As a child, he retained the innocence and wonder that opened doors closed to adult cynicism, while his adult form possessed the strength and knowledge necessary to face threats that would overwhelm a younger body and mind. The magic required to maintain such dual existence drew directly from the source of all temporal power, creating a localized suspension of the normal laws that govern the relationship between past, present, and future. The hero became a walking paradox that reality accepted because his purpose served the divine plan, his very existence proof that love can overcome even the most fundamental constraints that bind ordinary mortal experience. More than mere physical transformation, this blessing represented a state of spiritual completeness that allowed the hero to approach each challenge from the perspective best suited to its resolution. The wisdom of experience could be combined with the fresh insights of youth, while the strength of maturity could be balanced by the flexibility and creativity that characterized the young heart, unencumbered by preconceptions about what is and is not possible. The upgrading of weapons and equipment through fairy magic involves a process far more complex and meaningful than the simple enhancement of existing properties. For these improvements, work by awakening the latent potential that exists within every object, created through skill, dedication, and pure intention. When a master craftsman forges a blade with love and reverence for his art, when a smith pours his very soul into the creation of armor meant to protect the innocent, the resulting items contain within their molecular structure the capacity for greatness that can be unlocked by those who understand the deeper principles of divine transformation. Great fairies perceive these hidden qualities with senses that operate beyond the physical realm, reading the history and potential of each item as easily as mortals might examine surface appearance or basic functionality. A sword that has been wielded in defense of the helpless carries within its metal the memory of every noble deed performed with its edge, while a shield that has turned aside attacks meant for innocent victims bears the spiritual imprint of every act of protection it has facilitated. The fairies' magic works by amplifying these positive resonances while purging any negative associations that might have accumulated through misuse or contact with corrupting influences, restoring each item to its ideal state, and then enhancing that perfection through the application of divine power channeled directly from the realm of the goddess. The process requires not just magical ability, but profound understanding of the moral and spiritual dimensions of heroism, for the fairy must judge whether each enhancement serves the greater good or merely satisfies the wielder's desire for increased power. Weapons blessed through this process become more than mere tools of war, evolving into instruments of divine justice that respond to the wielder's intentions and moral character. A sword enhanced by fairy magic will strike true against evil while remaining unable to harm the innocent, its edge guided by the same moral compass that determines the worthiness of those who seek fairy blessing. Armor touched by such power provides protection that extends beyond the physical to encompass spiritual and emotional resilience, shielding heroes not just from enemy weapons, but from the despair and corruption that represent even greater threats to their mission. The process by which fairies judge the worthiness of those who seek their aid operates according to principles that transcend surface appearances or conventional measures of merit, for these divine beings perceive not just current actions, but the entire trajectory of spiritual development that has brought each supplicant to their domain. They see beyond temporary failures or moments of weakness to the fundamental character that defines each soul, understanding that true worthiness is measured not by perfection already achieved, but by the sincere desire to grow toward greater virtue and the willingness to sacrifice personal comfort in service of higher principles. Some heroes approach fairy fountains with hearts already purified through trials and dedication, their spiritual development clearly evident to any who possess the wisdom to perceive such things. These blessed individuals receive the fairies' gifts readily, for their preparation has made them ideal vessels for divine power, and their proven commitment to righteousness ensures that any enhancement of their abilities will be used only in ways that serve the greater good. Others arrive carrying the burden of past mistakes or the shadow of choices they have come to regret, their souls marked by the inevitable imperfections that characterize every mortal journey toward enlightenment. For these supplicants, the fairies' evaluation becomes a process of healing and purification, an opportunity to address the spiritual obstacles that prevent them from reaching their full potential as instruments of divine will. The trials that fairies devise to test the hearts of uncertain candidates are crafted with the precision of master artists and the wisdom of eternal teachers, each challenge designed to reveal specific aspects of character while providing opportunities for growth and redemption. These tests never seek to break or humiliate the supplicant, but rather to illuminate the path toward greater virtue and to strengthen the qualities that will be needed for the heroic work that lies ahead. Some trials take the form of illusions that force heroes to confront their deepest fears, revealing whether they possess the courage to act rightly, even when terrified by the potential consequences of their choices. Others present moral dilemmas that have no easy answers, requiring supplicants to demonstrate their commitment to principle, even when such commitment might result in personal loss or the temporary triumph of evil over good. The most challenging tests involve scenarios where heroes must choose between competing goods or navigate situations where every available option carries negative consequences, forcing them to reveal the hierarchy of values that guides their decision-making and the depth of their understanding regarding the complex moral landscape that defines real-world heroism. These trials often surprise supplicants by demonstrating that true virtue sometimes requires choices that appear selfish or cruel to outside observers, but actually serve deeper purposes that only divine wisdom can fully comprehend. The balance between power granted and responsibility earned represents one of the fundamental principles that governs all fairy magic, reflecting the understanding that abilities bestowed without corresponding moral development inevitably lead to corruption and the misuse of divine gifts for selfish or destructive purposes. Great fairies possess the wisdom to perceive exactly how much enhancement each hero can safely receive without becoming overwhelmed by power that exceeds their spiritual maturity or their capacity for maintaining proper perspective on their role in the cosmic struggle between light and darkness. This careful calibration ensures that heroes remain truly heroic rather than becoming superhuman beings whose abilities disconnect them from the mortal realm they have sworn to protect. The enhancements they receive amplify their existing qualities rather than replacing them with divine substitutes, maintaining the essential humanity that makes their sacrifices meaningful, while providing the tools necessary to face supernatural threats that would otherwise prove insurmountable. The responsibility component of this equation manifests in the form of intuitive understanding that accompanies every blessing, as recipients discover that their enhanced abilities come with equally enhanced obligations to use those gifts wisely and compassionately. Heroes blessed by fairies find themselves unable to ignore suffering they have the power to address. Their consciences, now attuned to frequencies of need and injustice, that might have remained invisible to their previous level of awareness. This heightened sensitivity to moral obligation serves as a natural check against the misuse of fairy gifts, for heroes quickly discover that attempts to use their enhanced abilities for selfish purposes result in spiritual discomfort, so intense that such behavior becomes literally unbearable. The fairies' magic works to align the recipient's desires with divine will, making virtuous action feel natural and rewarding, while creating internal resistance to any choices that would betray the trust implicit in the blessing they have received. The stories of heroes who have misused fairy gifts serve as cautionary tales that echo through the ages, reminding all who seek such blessings that divine power demands divine responsibility, and that those who accept the fairies' gifts without accepting the obligations that accompany them inevitably face consequences far worse than any earthly punishment. These fallen champions become object lessons in the dangers of spiritual pride and the corruption that results when power is divorced from virtue. One such tale tells of a warrior who received tremendous strength from the great fairy of power but allowed pride in his abilities to convince him that he deserved to rule over others rather than serve them, his enhanced capabilities becoming tools of oppression rather than instruments of protection. The fairy's blessing turned against him when he betrayed its purpose, his supernatural strength becoming a source of constant pain that grew worse with every act of cruelty, until he was forced to abandon his evil ways or be destroyed by the very power he had perverted. Another cautionary story speaks of a mage who gained deep magical knowledge from the great fairy of wisdom, but used that understanding to manipulate and deceive others rather than to teach and heal, his enhanced perception becoming a curse that forced him to witness the suffering his actions caused, until the weight of that knowledge drove him to madness. Only by renouncing his evil ways and dedicating his remaining years to repairing the damage he had caused could he find peace and restore the fairy's blessing to its proper function. These tales serve not only as warnings but as demonstrations of the mercy that characterizes fairy magic, for even the most severe consequences of misused blessings are designed to guide fallen heroes back toward the path of righteousness, rather than simply to punish them for their failures. The fairies understand that moral development is a gradual process that inevitably includes mistakes and setbacks, their magic structured to provide correction and guidance rather than condemnation and destruction. The connection between fairy blessings and sacred artifacts represents one of the most profound aspects of divine magic, for these legendary items serve as focal points through which the love and power of the goddess can be channeled with maximum efficiency and minimum corruption. When a fairy enhances a weapon like the Master Sword or sanctifies armor forged in the sacred fires of divine purpose, she is not simply improving the item's physical properties, but is creating a permanent link between the mortal realm and the infinite sources of power that flow through all existence. The Master Sword itself serves as the ultimate example of this principle, for this legendary blade exists simultaneously as a physical weapon and as a spiritual conduit that connects its wielder directly to the divine will that opposes all forms of evil and corruption. When great fairies work their magic upon this sacred weapon, they are not changing its essential nature, but are rather awakening dormant aspects of its divine purpose and enhancing its ability to serve as a bridge between the mortal hero who wields it and the cosmic forces that guide his mission. Each enhancement the sword receives through fairy magic makes it more perfectly suited to its role as the ultimate weapon against darkness, its edge growing sharper against evil, while becoming incapable of harming those who serve the light, its balance improving until it responds to its wielder's intentions as naturally as an extension of his own arm. More importantly, the blessing deepens the spiritual connection between hero and weapon, until they become partners in the truest sense, their combined strength far exceeding what either could accomplish alone. Other sacred artifacts respond to fairy magic in similar ways, their latent potential awakened through contact with divine love, and their effectiveness enhanced through alignment with the cosmic principles that govern the eternal struggle between good and evil. Shields blessed by fairies become impenetrable barriers against any attack motivated by hatred or malice, while armor touched by such magic provides protection that extends beyond the physical to encompass the emotional and spiritual dimensions of heroic existence. The process through which these enhancements are created requires not just magical power, but perfect understanding of the artifact's history, purpose, and place in the greater pattern of destiny that shapes the world. Fairies must perceive the intentions of the original creators, the heroic deeds already accomplished through the item's use, and the challenges that future wielders will face, weaving all of these elements together into blessings that honor the past while preparing for trials yet to come. Through their patient work across countless ages, the great fairies have created a network of blessed items and enhanced heroes whose influence extends far beyond their individual achievements, their combined efforts forming a tapestry of light and hope that strengthens with each passing generation. Every blessing granted, every weapon sanctified, every hero transformed, contributes to this growing reservoir of divine power that stands ready to support the forces of good whenever darkness threatens to overwhelm the world. The legacy of fairy magic endures not just in the items and abilities they bestow, but in the example they provide of love made manifest through service, of divine power exercised with perfect wisdom and infinite compassion, of the truth that the greatest magic is not that which conquers through force, but that which transforms through love and guides all creation toward the fulfillment of its highest potential. When the ancient evil, known as the Twilight, began to seep into the world like a malevolent fog that devoured light and hope with equal hunger, when the very fabric of reality grew thin beneath the weight of shadow that sought to transform all living things into pale reflections of their former selves, the great fairies of that troubled age found themselves facing challenges unlike any they had encountered in all their eons of existence. The corruption that spread across Hyrule was not merely another manifestation of the eternal struggle between good and evil, but something far more insidious and dangerous, a force that sought not to destroy life, but to twist it into forms that serve darkness while retaining enough of their original nature to make their fall into shadow all the more tragic and complete. The Twilight Realm itself represented a perversion of the natural order so profound that it threatened to unravel the very foundations upon which fairy magic operated, for this alien dimension existed in direct opposition to the principles of growth, healing, and transformation that define the essence of divine love made manifest. Where fairy magic sought to elevate and purify, the Twilight worked to diminish and corrupt, turning strength into weakness, courage into despair, and hope into the kind of bitter resignation that makes souls vulnerable to complete spiritual destruction. In response to this unprecedented threat, the great fairies of the Twilight era underwent their own form of transformation, adapting their ancient methods and expanding their understanding to encompass new forms of magic, specifically designed to counter the unique properties of shadow that had invaded their world. These adaptations required them to delve deeper into the mysteries of divine power than any of their predecessors had ever dared, exploring aspects of the goddess's nature that bordered on the incomprehensible, even to their enlightened consciousness. The process began with a fundamental shift in how they perceived and channeled magical energy. For the conventional approaches that had served them so well across countless ages proved insufficient when confronted with corruption that operated by inverting rather than simply opposing the forces of light. They discovered that Twilight Shadow could not be banished through direct confrontation, but required a more subtle approach that worked by restoring the natural balance that had been disrupted, rather than overwhelming darkness with greater brightness. This revelation led to the development of purification techniques that operated on multiple dimensional levels simultaneously, weaving together threads of divine power in patterns so complex that they approached the very mathematics underlying creation itself. The fairies learned to perceive not just the surface manifestations of twilight corruption, but the deeper spiritual wounds that made individuals and locations vulnerable to such influence, addressing the root causes of Shadow's appeal rather than merely treating its symptoms. The hidden caves and springs where great fairies took refuge during this dark period became more than simple sanctuaries, evolving into fortress temples where the fundamental principles of light and love could be preserved and strengthened, while the world outside struggled against forces that sought to remake it in Shadow's image. These refuges existed partially outside normal space and time, their locations shifting and changing according to need while remaining accessible to those whose hearts remained pure enough to perceive their true nature. Each sanctuary was carefully positioned at points where the world's spiritual energy flowed most strongly, creating networks of power that could support and reinforce each other across vast distances while providing safe havens for heroes and innocent civilians who found themselves threatened by the spreading twilight. The fairies worked tirelessly to maintain these refuges, pouring their own essence into protective barriers that could resist even the most concentrated forms of shadow corruption. The caves themselves were marvels of magical architecture that seemed to grow organically from the living rock, their walls carved with symbols and patterns that channeled divine energy, while telling the stories of every hero who had ever stood against the forces of darkness. Crystalline formations grew from floor and ceiling in spiraling patterns that followed the mathematical harmonies underlying all of creation, their surfaces reflecting not light but hope itself, creating an atmosphere of peace and renewal that could heal even the deepest spiritual wounds. At the heart of each sanctuary lay a spring whose waters had been blessed with properties specifically designed to counter twilight corruption, their crystalline depths carrying within them the concentrated essence of every prayer that had ever been offered in sincere faith for the restoration of the natural order. Heroes who bathed in these sacred waters found not only their physical injuries healed, but their resistance to shadow influence dramatically strengthened, their souls fortified against the whispers of despair that constantly sought to turn noble hearts toward darkness. The fairy lanterns that illuminated these sanctuaries represented perhaps the most innovative adaptation of traditional fairy magic to the unique challenges posed by twilight corruption, for these devices were far more than simple sources of illumination. Each lantern contained within its crystalline chamber a fragment of pure divine light that had been carefully harvested from the realm of the goddess herself, preserved in forms that could not be corrupted or diminished by any shadow influence, no matter how powerful or persistent. The light emanating from these lanterns possessed properties that went far beyond the ability to banish physical darkness, for it carried within its radiance the power to restore memory to those who had forgotten their true nature under Twilight's influence, to strengthen the bonds of love and friendship that shadow sought to sever, and to rekindle hope in hearts that had been convinced that defeat was inevitable and resistance was futile. More than mere illumination, these lanterns served as beacons that could guide lost travelers through the maze of deception that Twilight wove around its victims, their light visible to anyone whose heart retained even the smallest spark of nobility or compassion. Heroes carrying such lanterns found themselves able to navigate the twisted landscape that shadow had created, their path illuminated, not just by physical radiance, but by the kind of spiritual clarity that allows the pure of heart to distinguish truth from illusion, regardless of how convincing the deception might appear. The creation of each lantern required a ritual of such complexity and spiritual intensity that it could only be performed during moments of perfect celestial alignment, when the barriers between dimensions became thin enough to allow direct contact with the divine realm. The fairy would enter a state of deep meditation that opened her consciousness completely to the goddess's influence, becoming a conduit through which pure divine essence could flow into the crystalline chambers that would contain and focus its power. The process demanded not just magical ability but absolute purity of intention, for any trace of doubt or selfish desire would corrupt the light and render the lantern not just useless, but actively dangerous to anyone who tried to use it. Each successful creation represented a triumph of love over fear, hope over despair, and faith over the kind of cynical resignation that Twilight sought to instill in every soul it touched. The role that great fairies played in purifying areas touched by shadow went far beyond the simple restoration of corrupted locations to their original state, for true healing required addressing not just the visible damage that Twilight had caused, but the deeper spiritual wounds that had made such corruption possible in the first place. The fairies understood that shadow could only take root in soil prepared by despair, loneliness, and the kind of spiritual emptiness that results when souls become disconnected from the divine source of their being. Their purification work began with careful diagnosis of the specific forms of corruption present in each location, for Twilight shadow manifested differently depending on the nature of what it sought to corrupt and the particular vulnerabilities that had allowed it to gain purchase. Some areas showed signs of emotional corruption, where the natural feelings of love and compassion had been twisted into possessiveness and manipulation, while others displayed intellectual corruption, where wisdom had been perverted into cunning, and knowledge had been transformed into a tool for exploitation rather than enlightenment. The most challenging cases involved spiritual corruption, where the very foundations of an individual's or community's relationship with the divine had been systematically undermined until they no longer possessed the inner resources necessary to resist shadow's influence. These deep forms of corruption required healing that addressed not just current symptoms but the entire history of choices and circumstances that had led to such profound spiritual vulnerability. The purification process itself involved the careful application of divine energy in forms specifically adapted to address each type of corruption encountered, with the fairy serving as both physician and surgeon, teacher and guide, as she worked to restore the natural flow of spiritual energy that Twilight had disrupted or blocked. The work required incredible patience and precision, for any attempt to remove corruption too quickly or forcefully could cause more damage than the shadow itself had inflicted. Layer by layer, the fairy would dissolve the bonds that held Twilight corruption in place, replacing shadow influence with threads of divine light that could support healthy spiritual growth while providing resistance against future attempts at corruption. The process often took weeks or even months to complete, as each individual or location required healing that was specifically tailored to their unique circumstances and spiritual condition. The Great Fairy of the Sacred Grove occupied a position of particular importance during the Twilight Crisis, for her domain stood at the intersection of multiple dimensional pathways that shadow forces sought to control for their own purposes. This ancient being, whose wisdom had been accumulated across more eons than mortal minds could comprehend, possessed knowledge of purification techniques that dated back to the very beginning of creation, when the goddess herself had first established the boundaries between light and shadow. Her grove existed in a state of perpetual spring that served as a living testament to the power of divine love to overcome any form of corruption, no matter how deeply rooted or cleverly disguised it might be. The trees that grew within her domain had been blessed with properties that made them naturally resistant to all forms of shadow influence, their roots drawing sustenance directly from springs of liquid light, while their branches reached towards skies that showed not the current state of the world, but its potential for restoration and renewal. The grove's central clearing contained a pool whose waters reflected not the physical appearance of those who gazed into its depths, but the true condition of their souls, showing them exactly where corruption had taken root and what forms of healing would be required to achieve complete purification. Heroes who looked into this sacred mirror often found the experience overwhelming, for it revealed not only their current spiritual state, but the entire history of choices that had brought them to that point. Yet the fairy's presence transformed what might have been a source of despair into an opportunity for hope and healing, for she possessed the wisdom to guide each visitor through the process of understanding and addressing the wounds that made them vulnerable to shadow corruption. Her voice carried harmonics that could reach into the deepest recesses of traumatized souls, offering comfort and encouragement that made even the most painful revelations bearable when viewed as steps toward greater wholeness and spiritual health. The relationship between great fairies and the light spirits during the Twilight Crisis represented one of the most remarkable examples of cooperation between different orders of divine beings that had ever been witnessed in the mortal realm. These light spirits, ancient entities whose existence predated even the oldest fairy consciousness, possessed powers that operated on scales far beyond anything individual fairies could achieve. Yet they lacked the delicate touch and intimate understanding of mortal nature that made fairy magic so effective in dealing with personal-level corruption. The partnership that developed between these complementary forms of divine consciousness created a system of healing that could address corruption at every level simultaneously, from the cosmic disruptions that threatened the very fabric of reality, down to the individual spiritual wounds that made single souls vulnerable to shadow influence. The light spirits provided the raw power necessary to cleanse vast areas of corruption, while the fairies contributed the precision and wisdom needed to ensure that such cleansing actually healed, rather than simply remove the symptoms of spiritual disease. This cooperation required both sides to expand their understanding of divine magic and their appreciation for approaches that differed from their traditional methods, creating new forms of purification that combined the overwhelming power of light spirit energy with the gentle precision of fairy healing techniques. The results exceeded anything either group could have achieved alone, demonstrating that even among divine beings, the greatest accomplishments come through unity and mutual support rather than individual effort. The fairy fountains that operated during the Twilight period developed properties specifically adapted to counter the unique challenges posed by shadow corruption, their waters taking on qualities that could not only heal physical wounds but could also restore memory, strengthen willpower, and rekindle the kind of spiritual fire that makes souls naturally resistant to twilight influence. These enhanced properties required the fairies to pour more of their own essence into their domains than ever before, creating fountains that were literally extensions of their consciousness and personality. Heroes who bathed in these Twilight-era fountains often reported experiences that went far beyond simple healing, describing visions that provided insight into the true nature of shadow corruption and guidance for the battles yet to come. Some received prophetic dreams that revealed the locations of other heroes or sanctuaries, while others gained understanding of purification techniques they could use to help restore corrupted areas they encountered during their travels. The most profound transformations occurred when heroes allowed themselves to be completely immersed in the fountain's waters, surrendering their conscious control and trusting the fairies' wisdom to guide the healing process. These individuals often emerged not just healed but fundamentally changed, Their spiritual development accelerated by years, or even decades, as the fairies' magic helped them integrate lessons that would normally require extensive experience to fully understand. The protective enchantments that surrounded fairy domains during this period were far more complex and powerful than any that had been required in previous ages, for twilight corruption possessed the ability to influence perception and memory in ways that made traditional barriers ineffective. The fairies discovered that simple concealment or redirection was insufficient when dealing with an enemy that could manipulate the thoughts and feelings of those it touched, requiring instead protections that operated on multiple dimensional levels simultaneously. These enhanced defenses worked by creating zones where the natural laws that Twilight sought to subvert were reinforced and strengthened, making it impossible for shadow corruption to gain purchase within the protected area, regardless of how powerful or persistent its attempts might be. The boundaries of each sanctuary became walls of crystallized divine will that could not be crossed by any being whose heart harbored shadow influence, while remaining completely permeable to those whose intentions aligned with the principles of light and love. The creation of such defenses required fairies to delve deeper into the fundamental nature of reality than any of their kind had ever attempted, exploring the mathematical foundations underlying existence itself and learning to manipulate the basic constants that govern the interaction between different dimensional planes. This knowledge came at great personal cost, for such deep understanding of cosmic principles required them to temporarily surrender aspects of their individual identity and merge partially with the universal consciousness from which all divine power ultimately flows. Yet this sacrifice proved worthwhile when measured against the protection it provided for countless innocent souls who found refuge within fairy domains during the darkest periods of the Twilight Crisis. These sanctuaries became islands of hope in a sea of despair, places where the fundamental goodness of creation could be experienced and remembered, even when the outside world seemed completely given over to shadow and corruption. The legacy of the Twilight period's adaptations continued to influence fairy magic long after the immediate crisis had passed, for the techniques developed during that dark time provided valuable tools for dealing with other forms of corruption that would emerge in future ages. The great fairies who lived through the Twilight Crisis became repositories of knowledge and experience that would prove invaluable to their successors, their hard-won wisdom preserved within the collective consciousness that linked all fairy kind across time and space. Their courage and innovation during humanity's darkest hour demonstrated that divine love possesses infinite creativity when faced with threats to those under its protection, adapting and growing stronger in response to each new challenge, while never losing sight of the fundamental principles that make such love both powerful and trustworthy. The Twilight period thus became not just a time of crisis overcome, but a testament to the endless resourcefulness of compassion when it is guided by wisdom and sustained by faith in the ultimate triumph of light over darkness. When the ancient kingdom of Hyrule vanished beneath the endless waters of the Great Flood, submerged by divine intervention that sought to cleanse the world of corruption that had grown too deep and pervasive to be healed through any gentler means, the great fairies who had served as guardians and healers for countless generations found themselves facing a transformation as profound and challenging as any that had occurred since their first emergence from the primordial springs of creation itself. The world they had known and protected for eons beyond mortal memory was gone, replaced by an infinite ocean that stretched from horizon to horizon, its depths concealing the ruins of once mighty cities and the bones of civilizations that had flourished under their patient care. Yet these divine beings, whose existence transcended the physical limitations that bound mortal creatures to specific environments and geographic locations, discovered within themselves reserves of adaptability and creative power that enabled them not merely to survive this cataclysmic change, but to evolve new forms of service that were perfectly suited to the transformed world that emerged. From beneath the waves, the Great Flood, which might have seemed like an ending to those who viewed events only from the perspective of material existence, became instead a new beginning that opened possibilities for fairy magic and divine intervention that had never existed in the terrestrial realm. The adaptation process required the great fairies to fundamentally reconsider every aspect of their traditional approaches to healing, blessing, and guidance, for the oceanic environment presented challenges and opportunities that bore little resemblance to anything they had encountered during their long stewardship of the land-based kingdom. Water, which had always played an important role in fairy magic through the fountains and springs that served as focal points for their power, now became the dominant element that shaped every aspect of existence in this new world. The fairies discovered that their consciousness could extend through the ocean's depths with even greater freedom than it had moved through the terrestrial landscape, the liquid medium providing a more efficient conduit for the transmission of magical energy and divine awareness than any environment they had previously inhabited. Their perception expanded to encompass vast underwater realms that teemed with life forms both familiar and utterly alien, creatures that had adapted to the submerged world in ways that demonstrated the incredible resilience and creativity inherent in all living things. The fairy islands that emerged from the endless expanse of the Great Sea became more than simple refuges or bases of operation, evolving into complex magical ecosystems where the boundaries between the physical and spiritual realms became so thin as to be nearly imperceptible. These islands existed simultaneously in multiple dimensions, their visible surfaces representing only the most superficial manifestation of domains that extended deep into the ocean floor and high into the celestial spheres above the waves. Each island was shaped by the personality and magical specialty of the great fairy who claimed it as her domain, growing organically from the interaction between her divine essence and the primal forces of wind and wave that defined the new world's character. Some islands manifested as towering spires of crystallized sea foam that caught and reflected sunlight in patterns too beautiful to be accidental, while others took the form of coral gardens that bloomed with flowers that existed nowhere else in creation, their petals carrying fragrances that could heal emotional wounds and restore lost memories. The process by which these islands came into being required the fairies to work in harmony with oceanic forces that operated according to principles unlike anything they had encountered in their terrestrial experience, learning to channel their power through currents and tides, through the songs of whales and the dance of dolphins, through the countless forms of sea life that had become the new world's dominant inhabitants. This collaboration between divine consciousness and aquatic nature produced results that exceeded even the fairies' expectations, creating sanctuaries that pulsed with life and magic in perfect harmony. The underwater grottos that the great fairies established in the ocean's depths represented perhaps the most remarkable achievement of this period of adaptation, for these submerged sanctuaries provided safe havens for those who needed healing or guidance, but could not reach the surface islands due to the dangers that lurked in the Great Sea's open waters. These grottos existed in pockets of air that the fairies maintained through constant application of their power, creating environments where land-dwelling creatures could breathe and rest while remaining completely protected from the storms and sea monsters that made oceanic travel so perilous. The architecture of these underwater sanctuaries defied every conventional understanding of what was possible beneath the waves, with chambers carved from living coral that continued to grow and change according to the needs of each visitor, walls decorated with patterns of bioluminescent algae that responded to the emotional state of those present, and fountains of fresh water that bubbled up from hidden springs deep in the ocean floor. The grottos became gathering places for the scattered survivors of the flood, temporary refuges where different groups could meet, share information, and coordinate their efforts to rebuild some form of civilization in their transformed world. The Great Fairy of the Northern Triangle Islands established her domain in a region where the ocean currents converged in patterns that created natural amphitheaters of calm water. Surrounded by areas of perpetual storm, her presence transforming these already dramatic geological features into something that approached the sublime. Her island rose from the depths like a mountain of pearl and amber, its surfaces carved by wind and wave into shapes that told the story of every hero who had ever braved the dangers of the sea in service of others. This fairy specialized in the blessing of vessels and equipment designed for oceanic exploration and adventure. Her magic, imbuing ships with the ability to navigate safely through the most treacherous waters, while protecting their crews from the madness that could result from too much time spent surrounded by the infinite emptiness of the sea. Her fountains produced waters that could sustain sailors through months-long voyages without resupply, while her touch could transform ordinary sailing equipment into instruments capable of reading wind and current patterns with supernatural accuracy. The transformation rituals she performed were specifically adapted to the needs of those who would spend their lives upon the waves, granting enhanced intuition that allowed sailors to sense approaching storms or hidden dangers long before such threats became visible to normal perception. Her blessed mariners developed the ability to communicate with sea creatures, forming alliances with dolphins and whales that could provide assistance during emergencies or guidance toward destinations that might otherwise remain forever beyond reach. The Great Fairy of the Eastern Triangle Islands claimed a domain characterized by perpetual mists that concealed wonders and dangers in equal measure, her island existing in a state of constant gentle rain that nourished gardens of kelp and seagrass that grew in impossible spirals reaching toward the surface far above. Her specialty lay in the enhancement of weapons and armor for underwater combat, her magic enabling heroes to fight effectively in the three-dimensional environment of the ocean depths, while providing protection against the crushing pressure and corrosive effects of deep-sea exploration. Her fountains were marvels of magical engineering that could function equally well above or below the water's surface, providing healing and restoration to those who approached them regardless of whether they breathed air or extracted oxygen from the sea itself. The weapons she blessed gained the ability to cut through water with no resistance while striking with devastating force against any creature that threatened innocent life, while her enhanced armor provided perfect protection against both physical attacks and the psychological effects of prolonged isolation in the vast emptiness of the deep ocean. The trials she devised for those seeking her blessing often took the form of underwater quests that required heroes to descend into the darkest depths of the sea, facing not just the physical dangers of pressure and limited air supply, but the spiritual challenges that came from confronting the profound loneliness and existential uncertainty that the ocean's immensity could inspire in even the bravest soul. Those who successfully completed her trials emerged with more than enhanced equipment, gaining a deep understanding of their own inner resources and an unshakable confidence in their ability to face any challenge the transformed world might present. The role that great fairies played in blessing the Wind Waker and other sailing equipment represented one of their most important contributions to the survival and prosperity of the scattered communities that struggled to maintain civilization in the wake of the Great Flood. The Wind Waker itself, that legendary conductor's baton that could command the very winds and currents that governed oceanic travel, required blessings of such complexity and power that its creation demanded the combined efforts of multiple fairies working in perfect harmony across vast distances. The process began with the careful selection and preparation of materials that could withstand not just the physical stresses of oceanic travel, but the incredible magical energies that would flow through the instrument whenever it was used, to command the natural forces of wind and wave. The wood from which the Wind Waker was carved had to come from trees that had grown in places where the boundary between the terrestrial and divine realms was thinnest, their grain infused with the memory of every prayer that had ever been offered by those who depended on favorable winds for their survival. The fairy magic that imbued this legendary instrument worked by creating sympathetic resonances between the wielder's intentions and the vast atmospheric and oceanic systems that governed weather patterns across the entire Great Sea, allowing a single individual to influence forces that normally operated on scales far beyond mortal comprehension. The Wind Waker became not just a tool for controlling wind and current, but a conduit through which the wielder could communicate directly with the elemental spirits that governed these primal forces. The blessing process required each participating fairy to contribute aspects of her own essence to the instrument's creation, their combined consciousness creating a magical matrix that could interpret the user's musical commands and translate them into the complex patterns of energy manipulation needed to produce the desired meteorological effects. The result was an artifact that responded not just to technical skill, but to the moral character and spiritual development of whoever attempted to use it, ensuring that its incredible power could never be turned toward destructive or selfish purposes. Similar principles governed the fairy blessing of other essential sailing equipment, from the magical charts that could reveal hidden islands and safe harbors to the enchanted sails that could catch favorable winds even in the depths of the doldrums. Each item required careful consideration of how it would be used and what safeguards needed to be built into its magical structure to prevent misuse or accidental harm to innocent parties who might encounter its effects. The connection between fairy magic and the preservation of life during the Great Flood represented one of the most profound demonstrations of divine love and power that had ever been witnessed in the mortal realm. For the challenge of maintaining viable ecosystems and sustainable communities in a world that had been fundamentally transformed required innovations and adaptations that pushed even fairy magic to its limits. The fairies understood that their role had expanded beyond the traditional functions of healing individual heroes and blessing their equipment to encompass the much larger responsibility of ensuring that life itself could continue to flourish in its new aquatic environment. This preservation work began with the careful cultivation of new forms of plant and animal life that could thrive in the oceanic world while providing the resources that scattered human communities would need for long-term survival. The fairies worked with the underlying genetic patterns that governed biological development, not by forcing unnatural changes, but by awakening dormant potentials that had always existed but had never been needed in the terrestrial environment. Sea vegetables that could provide complete nutrition were developed from kelp and algae species that the fairies enhanced with magical properties, while fish and other marine life were blessed with increased fertility and enhanced nutritional value to ensure that fishing could provide sustainable protein sources for communities that no longer had access to terrestrial agriculture. The fairies also developed new techniques for purifying salt water into fresh water suitable for drinking and irrigation, their magic working at the molecular level to separate harmful elements while preserving the minerals and trace elements needed for health. The most challenging aspect of this preservation work involved maintaining the psychological and spiritual health of communities that had lost not just their physical homes, but the entire cultural and social framework that had given meaning and structure to their lives for countless generations. The fairies understood that physical survival without hope or purpose was merely a postponement of extinction, requiring them to develop new approaches to healing that addressed the deep trauma and existential uncertainty that characterized life in the post-flood world. Their response to this challenge involved the creation of new forms of community-based healing that brought scattered survivors together in ways that fostered mutual support and shared purpose, their magic working not just on individuals but on the social bonds that held groups together and gave them the collective strength needed to face an uncertain future. The Fairy Islands became gathering places where different communities could meet, trade resources and information, and participate in rituals of remembrance and renewal that helped them maintain connections to their cultural heritage while adapting to their new circumstances. The relationship between great fairy fountains and the new ocean currents that governed travel and communication in the transformed world created a network of magical pathways that connected distant communities and provided safe passage for those who understood how to read the subtle signs that marked these blessed routes. The fairies discovered that their fountain magic could influence the flow of ocean currents in much the same way that terrestrial fountains had affected underground streams, creating stable pathways through the chaos of the open sea. These fairy-blessed currents carried more than just water and marine life, serving as conduits for magical energy and divine guidance that could reach communities thousands of miles away from the nearest fairy island. Messages and supplies could be entrusted to these currents with confidence that they would reach their intended destinations, while distress signals sent along the blessed pathways would alert the fairies to communities in need of immediate assistance. The navigation of these hidden highways required a combination of traditional seamanship and magical sensitivity that few possessed, but those who mastered the necessary skills found that they could travel vast distances with unprecedented speed and safety. The currents themselves seemed to respond to the intentions and needs of those who traveled upon them, accelerating the passage of heroes on urgent missions while providing gentle, restful journeys for those who carried wounded or exhausted passengers. The legacy of fairy magic during the Wind Waker era established patterns of oceanic civilization that would endure long after the immediate crisis of the Great Flood had passed, creating sustainable ways of life that harmonized human needs with the rhythms and requirements of the marine environment. The communities that emerged from this period carried within their cultures a deep respect for the sea and its inhabitants that reflected the fairy influence on their development, their traditions emphasizing cooperation and mutual aid rather than competition and domination. The stories and legends that grew from this age of oceanic adventure celebrated not just individual heroism, but the collective efforts of entire communities working together to overcome challenges that no single person could face. Alone, reflecting the fairy, understanding that true strength comes from unity and shared purpose, rather than individual power or achievement. These tales became the foundation for new forms of cultural identity that could thrive in the transformed world while maintaining connections to the wisdom and values of the lost terrestrial kingdom. The great fairies who guided civilization through the trials of the Great Flood demonstrated that divine love possesses infinite adaptability when faced with the need to preserve and protect the essential goodness of creation. Their willingness to transform their own nature and methods in service of that greater purpose, providing an example of selfless dedication that would inspire heroes and communities for generations to come. Their success in nurturing new forms of life and civilization in the oceanic world proved that no disaster, no matter how complete or devastating it might seem, can ultimately triumph over the creative power of love, guided by wisdom and sustained by faith in the fundamental goodness of existence itself. When the great calamity finally passed, and the century-long nightmare that had gripped Hyrule began to lift like morning mist dispersing before the warmth of dawn, the four great fairies who had slumbered through those dark years in sanctuaries hidden from the corruption that had claimed so much of the world slowly stirred to wakefulness, their consciousness emerging from the protective dormancy that had preserved them through the ages of shadow and malice. These magnificent beings, whose essence had been carefully shielded from the taint that had transformed guardians into destroyers and protectors into predators, found themselves facing a world that bore only passing resemblance to the kingdom they remembered from their dreams of happier times. The land that greeted their awakening was scarred but not broken, wounded but beginning the slow process of healing that would transform those very scars into sources of strength and beauty that had never existed before the trials that created them. Across the length and breadth of Hyrule, life had found ways to adapt and flourish even in the shadow of ancient evil. Communities had formed from scattered survivors who discovered that cooperation and mutual aid provided strength that individual effort could never achieve, and hope had taken root in hearts that had learned to find meaning and purpose even in the midst of suffering and uncertainty. The great fairies emerged from their long slumber not as the same beings who had entered protective dormancy a century before, but as evolved manifestations of divine love, whose understanding had been deepened and refined by their experiences of witnessing mortal courage and resilience during the darkest period their world had ever known. Their consciousness had remained partially active even during their hibernation, allowing them to observe and learn from the countless acts of heroism and sacrifice that had kept the flame of hope burning through the long years when it seemed that darkness might triumph permanently over the forces of light and goodness. Kotara, the great fairy of central Hyrule, established her renewed domain in the heart of the kingdom, where the ancient roads once converged and where travelers from every corner of the realm had gathered to share news and trade goods in the golden days before the calamity transformed their world. Her fountain emerged in a grove of trees that had grown during the years of her slumber, their branches intertwining overhead to create natural cathedral spaces where light filtered through leaves in patterns that seemed to tell stories of endurance and renewal, of the patient work required to heal wounds that had seemed beyond all possibility of restoration. This magnificent fairy manifested with a gentleness that spoke of deep understanding of the fragility that characterized life in the post-calamity world, her form radiating the kind of nurturing warmth that could comfort hearts still carrying the trauma of loss and displacement while providing the strength needed to continue building toward a better future. Her flower-crowned head moved with graceful deliberation as she surveyed the transformed landscape of her domain, her eyes holding depths of compassion that seemed to encompass every story of suffering and survival that had unfolded during her century of protective sleep. Her specialty in the art of magical enhancement had evolved during her dormancy to encompass not just the improvement of weapons and armor, but the strengthening of the bonds between communities and individuals, her blessings working to foster the cooperation and mutual understanding that would be essential for Hyrule's recovery from the devastation that had befallen it. Heroes who sought her aid discovered that her gifts extended far beyond the enhancement of their personal capabilities, to include the ability to inspire others and to see possibilities for healing and renewal, even in situations that appeared hopeless to ordinary perception. The gentle nature that defined Kotara's approach to her sacred work reflected her understanding that the post-calamity world required healing rather than conquest, restoration rather than domination, and the patient cultivation of trust and hope rather than the dramatic gestures that had characterized heroism in earlier ages. Her touch could mend not just physical wounds, but the deeper injuries to faith and confidence that made it difficult for survivors to believe that their efforts to rebuild could ever result in anything approaching the beauty and prosperity that their ancestors had known. Kesa, the great fairy of the Hebrew region, awakened in the frozen wilderness, where the aurora painted the night sky in colors that seemed borrowed from the dreams of artists, whose vision transcended the limitations of earthly pigments. Her domain encompassed vast expanses of snow and ice that had remained largely untouched by the corruption that had claimed other regions, their pristine beauty serving as a reminder that some aspects of the world's essential goodness had survived even the darkest period in recorded history. This remarkable fairy appeared as a being whose form seemed to be carved from crystallized winter starlight, her presence creating an atmosphere of crystalline clarity that allowed those who approached her to see through the confusion and uncertainty that often clouded decision-making in the complex post-calamity world. Her ice-touched domain was not a place of coldness or harsh rejection, but rather a sanctuary where the mind could achieve the kind of perfect stillness that makes true wisdom possible, where heroes could find the inner peace necessary to make choices based on love and compassion rather than fear and desperation. The connection between Kesa's icy domain and her specialized magical abilities created unique opportunities for the kind of purification and renewal that could only occur when the soul was stripped of all non-essential concerns and distractions, her frozen fountains producing waters that could cleanse not just physical ailments, but the spiritual confusion that made it difficult for heroes to understand their true purpose and calling. The trials she devised for those seeking her blessing often involved periods of solitary meditation, in conditions that would test their ability to maintain hope and determination, even when surrounded by the kind of stark emptiness that could either drive individuals to despair or awaken them to the profound beauty that exists in simplicity and silence. Her gifts to worthy heroes included enhanced resistance to both physical and spiritual corruption, protection that would prove invaluable as they ventured into regions where residual malice still lingered in forms that could influence thoughts and emotions in subtle but dangerous ways. More importantly, her blessings carried with them the ability to see clearly through deception and illusion, a gift that enabled heroes to distinguish between genuine opportunities for healing and restoration and the false promises that corrupted forces often used to lead the well-intentioned astray from their righteous paths. Mija, the great fairy of the Gerudo Desert, emerged from her long slumber in an oasis that had been hidden for generations beneath shifting sands that had concealed and protected her sanctuary from the worst effects of the calamity's corruption. Her awakening brought forth springs of pure water that transformed the surrounding desert into a garden paradise, where flowers bloomed in defiance of the harsh environment and date palms bore fruit that possessed magical properties capable of sustaining travelers through the most challenging desert journey. The connection between this great fairy and the warrior culture of the Gerudo people had evolved during her dormancy into something approaching perfect symbiosis, her consciousness having absorbed the memories and experiences of countless generations of desert women who had drawn strength from the harsh beauty of their homeland while maintaining the traditions and values that had allowed their prominent culture to survive and flourish even during the darkest periods of their history. Her understanding of what it meant to find beauty and meaning in struggle had been refined until it approached the divine, making her an ideal guide for heroes who needed to discover their own capacity for perseverance in the face of seemingly insurmountable obstacles. Mija's manifestation combined the ethereal beauty characteristic of all great fairies with the kind of practical wisdom that comes from intimate knowledge of what is required to survive and thrive in challenging circumstances. Her form shifting between appearances that emphasize different aspects of her nature depending on what each visitor needed to see and understand. To those who required gentle encouragement, she appeared as a nurturing figure whose presence provided comfort and reassurance, while to those who needed to be challenged to reach their full potential, she manifested as a demanding teacher whose expectations could inspire individuals to achieve greatness they had never imagined possible. The blessings she bestowed upon worthy heroes reflected her deep understanding of the relationship between inner strength and external achievement, her magic working to awaken dormant capabilities, while providing the confidence and determination needed to use those capabilities effectively in service of others. Her enhanced warriors discovered that their physical abilities had been increased not just in terms of raw power but in terms of endurance and resilience, their bodies becoming capable of sustained effort under conditions that would overwhelm normal human physiology, while their spirits remained undaunted by setbacks or temporary defeats. Terra, the great fairy of the Akala region, established her renewed domain in the northeastern reaches of Hyrule, where ancient citadels had once stood guard against invasion, and where the ruins of mighty fortresses served as reminders of the kingdom's martial heritage and the courage of those who had died defending their homeland against forces that sought to destroy everything they held dear. Her awakening brought new life to lands that had been devastated by warfare, her presence causing flowers to bloom among the rubble and springs, to emerge from ground that had been salted by the tears of those who mourned the fallen. This fierce fairy embodied the protective instincts that had once motivated the greatest defenders of Hyrule's borders, her consciousness shaped by centuries of witnessing the kind of heroism that emerges when individuals choose to stand against overwhelming odds rather than allow evil to triumph through their inaction or cowardice. Her understanding of what it meant to fight, not for conquest or glory, but for the preservation of innocence and the protection of those who could not protect themselves, had been refined during her dormancy until it represented the purest expression of righteous fury, guided by perfect wisdom. The fierce protection that characterized Terra's approach to her sacred duties manifested in blessings that enhanced not just combat effectiveness, but the moral clarity and emotional stability needed to face the kind of enemies whose corruption could influence the thoughts and feelings of those who opposed them. Her enhanced warriors found themselves protected against despair and doubt, their hearts filled with the absolute certainty that their cause was just and their efforts were meaningful regardless of how difficult their circumstances might become. The trials she devised for those seeking her aid often took the form of challenges that tested not just physical courage but moral resolve, scenarios where heroes had to choose between easy victories that came at the cost of innocent suffering and difficult paths that honored their principles even when such honor seemed likely to result in defeat. Those who passed her tests emerged with more than enhanced abilities, gaining the kind of unshakable integrity that could withstand any temptation or pressure to compromise their values for the sake of temporary advantage. The horse god Melania represented a unique manifestation of fairy magic that had evolved during the post-calamity period to address the specific needs of a world where the bonds between humans and their animal companions had become more important than ever before for survival and the maintenance of civilization. This remarkable being, whose domain existed at the intersection of several dimensional planes, possessed the extraordinary ability to restore life to horses and other equine companions, whose deaths had resulted from their loyal service to heroes and travelers who depended on their strength and speed. The magic that enabled Melania to perform resurrections operated according to principles that differed significantly from conventional fairy healing, for it required the ability to recall souls that had already begun their journey to whatever realm awaited them beyond the boundaries of mortal existence. This process demanded not just incredible magical power, but perfect understanding of the bonds of love and loyalty that connected individual souls across the boundaries between species, relationships that transcended physical death, because they were rooted in emotional and spiritual connections that existed on levels beyond the material world. The horse god's sanctuary was designed to honor the sacrifices made by countless equine companions who had given their lives in service to heroes and innocent travelers. Its chambers decorated with crystalline sculptures that captured not just the physical appearance of legendary steeds, but the essence of the noble spirit that had driven them to loyalty and courage that exceeded even human understanding. The springs within this sacred space possessed the unique property of being able to sustain the spark of life even after normal death had occurred, provided that the deceased had died in the performance of duty motivated by love rather than fear. The resurrection process itself required the willing participation of both the human who sought to restore their companion and the soul of the horse whose return to life was being requested. For Melania understood that true healing could never be imposed against the will of those involved, but must emerge from the genuine desire for reunion that honored the relationship between the parties rather than serving selfish purposes or attempting to deny the natural order of existence. Heroes who approached with hearts full of genuine grief and love for their fallen companions found that the horse god's magic could indeed bridge the gap between life and death, while those motivated by pride or convenience discovered that some boundaries could not be crossed by any power that lacked the proper spiritual foundation. The role that fairy magic played in Hyrule's recovery and rebuilding efforts extended far beyond the traditional functions of healing individual heroes and enhancing their equipment to encompass the much larger challenge of helping entire communities develop the resilience and cooperation needed to create sustainable civilization in a world that had been fundamentally transformed by a century of corruption and decay. The great fairies understood that their awakening had occurred not just to serve individual champions, but to provide the spiritual and magical foundation that would be required for the kingdom's renewal on every level, from personal healing to social reconstruction. This broader mission required them to develop new applications of their traditional magic, creating blessings that could strengthen the bonds between community members, while fostering the kind of mutual trust and shared purpose that would be essential for successful collaboration on the massive projects that rebuilding would require. Their fountains became gathering places where representatives from different communities could meet to coordinate their efforts, their magical properties helping to overcome the suspicion and misunderstanding that might otherwise prevent cooperation between groups that had developed different survival strategies during the long years of isolation. The agricultural blessings that the fairies provided proved crucial for communities that were attempting to restore productive farming to lands that had been scarred by warfare and neglect, their magic working not just to heal damaged soil, but to awaken dormant fertility that could support crops capable of thriving in the post-calamity environment. Gardens blessed by fairy magic produced yields that exceeded anything achieved through conventional farming methods, while requiring less labor and fewer resources, creating surplus that could support the craftsmen and scholars whose work would be needed to restore higher levels of civilization. The healing of traumatized populations required perhaps the most delicate and complex applications of fairy magic, for the survivors of the Great Calamity carried wounds that went far deeper than physical injury to encompass the kind of spiritual and emotional damage that could affect entire generations if not properly addressed. The fairies developed therapeutic techniques that could reach into the deepest recesses of damaged psyches, not to impose healing from outside, but to awaken the natural resilience and capacity for growth that existed within every soul, regardless of how deeply it might have been buried by trauma and loss. These healing processes often took the form of guided experiences that allowed individuals to revisit their traumatic memories in environments of perfect safety and support, processing emotions and integrating lessons that had been too overwhelming to understand at the time of their original occurrence. The fairies served not as healers who imposed their will upon damaged souls, but as midwives who assisted in the birth of new understanding and self-compassion that could transform even the most terrible experiences into sources of strength and wisdom. The restoration of cultural traditions and artistic expression represented another crucial aspect of the fairies' contribution to Hyrule's renewal, for they understood that true civilization required more than mere survival and material prosperity, but needed the kind of beauty and meaning that could only emerge from hearts that had been touched by wonder and inspiration. Their influence helped to revive forgotten songs and dances, to inspire new forms of artistic expression that honored both the past and the possibilities of the future, and to create environments where creativity could flourish, even in the midst of the practical challenges that rebuilding inevitably entailed. The great fairies of the Breath of the Wild era demonstrated that divine love possesses infinite capacity for adaptation and growth when faced with the need to serve creation in new ways. Their willingness to evolve and expand their understanding, providing a model of flexibility and responsiveness that inspired the communities they served to approach their own challenges with similar creativity and determination. Their success in nurturing the kingdom's recovery proved that no disaster, no matter how complete or devastating, can ultimately triumph over the power of love, guided by wisdom and sustained by the kind of faith that finds meaning and purpose, even in the midst of suffering and uncertainty. The legacy they established during this crucial period of renewal would endure long after the immediate crisis of rebuilding had passed, their influence woven into the very fabric of the restored kingdom in ways that would continue to inspire and guide future generations of heroes and communities long after their own direct intervention was no longer needed. Their patient work during Hyrule's darkest hour had planted seeds of hope and healing that would continue to bear fruit for ages to come, proving that the greatest magic is not that which achieves dramatic victories, but that which nurtures the kind of gradual transformation that allows broken things to become more beautiful than they ever were before they were shattered by the forces of darkness and despair. Across the vast tapestry of time that stretches from the first moment of creation to the final note of existence's eternal song, the great fairies have maintained their sacred vigil as witnesses to patterns that repeat themselves with the precision of cosmic clockwork, yet never lose their capacity to surprise and inspire even the most ancient of consciousness. The cyclical nature of fairy power operates according to principles that transcend the linear progression of mortal history, for these divine beings exist simultaneously in multiple temporal dimensions, their awareness encompassing not just the immediate present, but the echoes of past ages and the shadows of futures yet to be born. This extraordinary relationship with time itself allows the great fairies to perceive the deeper rhythms that govern the eternal struggle between light and darkness, understanding that what appears to mortals as a series of separate crises and victories is actually a single, continuous dance of opposing forces that creates the tension necessary for growth and the challenges required for spiritual development. Each manifestation of evil that rises to threaten the world carries within it the seeds of its own defeat, while every triumph of good contains the potential for complacency that might allow darkness to gain ground in unexpected ways. The fairy perspective on this eternal cycle reveals truths that remain hidden from those bound by normal temporal perception, for they see how each age builds upon the foundations laid by its predecessors while simultaneously preparing the ground for challenges and opportunities that will define future generations. The hero of time's struggles against Ganondorf created ripples that would influence events across multiple timelines, while the hero of Wind's victory over the flooded world's darkness established patterns of oceanic civilization that would endure long after the waters receded and new lands emerged from beneath the waves. Yet perhaps most remarkably, the great fairies have discovered that their own power grows stronger rather than weaker with each completed cycle. Their understanding deepened by every encounter with heroism, and their compassion expanded by witnessing the countless forms that love and sacrifice can take when faced with seemingly impossible odds. This accumulation of wisdom and experience creates a feedback loop that enhances their ability to serve future heroes, each blessing they bestow informed by the memory of every previous blessing and its ultimate consequences in the grand pattern of existence. The memory that great fairies maintain of heroes across multiple incarnations represents one of the most profound and mysterious aspects of their divine nature, for they recognize not just the physical resemblance between different manifestations of the heroic spirit, but the deeper continuity that connects souls across the boundaries of death and rebirth. When they encounter Link in his various incarnations throughout the ages, they perceive not separate individuals who happen to share certain characteristics, but facets of a single, eternal essence that has chosen to return again and again to serve the cause of light and protection. This recognition goes far beyond simple pattern matching or surface similarity, encompassing the fundamental frequencies at which each heroic soul vibrates, and the unique combination of courage, compassion, and wisdom that defines the true nature of heroism, regardless of the specific challenges it faces in any given age. The great fairies see how each incarnation builds upon the achievements of its predecessors while developing new aspects of heroic potential that were not needed in previous eras, the eternal spirit of the hero growing ever more complete through its accumulated experiences across multiple lifetimes. The relationship between fairy consciousness and heroic memory creates opportunities for guidance and support that transcend the limitations of individual incarnations, as the wisdom gained in one age can be made available to inform the choices and inspire the courage of heroes in subsequent eras. This transmission of knowledge occurs not through direct communication, but through the subtle influences that fairy magic can weave into the fabric of destiny itself, ensuring that each new hero has access to the insights and strengths needed to face their particular challenges, while maintaining the freedom to develop their own unique approach to the eternal mission they have accepted. The fairy perspective on the eternal struggle between good and evil reveals aspects of this cosmic conflict that remain invisible to those who experience it only from within the limitations of mortal existence. For the great fairies understand that darkness serves purposes within the divine plan that go beyond its obvious role as an obstacle to be overcome. The presence of evil creates the conditions necessary for the development of virtues that could never be cultivated in an environment of perfect peace and harmony, while the constant threat of corruption provides the motivation required for souls to actively choose goodness rather than simply accepting it as the natural state of existence. This deeper understanding allows the great fairies to maintain hope and purpose, even during the darkest periods of history, when evil seems to triumph completely and the forces of light appear to have been extinguished beyond any possibility of restoration. They know that such apparent defeats are temporary setbacks rather than ultimate failures, that the divine love which underlies all existence possesses infinite patience and creativity in developing new strategies for nurturing growth and inspiring transformation, even under the most challenging circumstances. The fairy awareness of how each manifestation of darkness ultimately serves the cause of light helps them provide guidance and comfort to heroes who struggle with doubt and despair when faced with enemies whose power seems overwhelming and pronged, whose corruption appears absolute. Through their blessings and counsel, they help champions understand that their role is not to achieve perfect victory in their own lifetimes, but to contribute to a much larger process of spiritual evolution that encompasses countless generations and extends across dimensions of existence that mortal minds can barely comprehend. The role that great fairies play as witnesses to the rise and fall of kingdoms provides them with unique insights into the cyclical nature of political and social development, understanding that even the most magnificent civilizations contain within them the seeds of their own transformation and renewal. They have watched as golden ages of peace and prosperity gradually give way to periods of corruption and decline, only to witness the emergence of new forms of organization and culture that build upon the wisdom of the past, while adapting to meet the challenges of changed circumstances. This long perspective enables the great fairies to provide guidance that helps both individual heroes and entire communities navigate the complex transitions that mark the boundaries between different historical eras. Their counsel, informed by understanding of patterns that repeat themselves across cultures and centuries, while never losing their appreciation for the unique aspects of each situation they encounter. They serve as repositories of institutional memory that preserve the lessons learned through countless experiments in governance and social organization, ensuring that valuable insights are not lost when kingdoms fall and new civilizations arise from their ashes. The fairy understanding of how kingdoms rise and fall also encompasses awareness of the spiritual dimensions that underlie political and economic developments, recognizing that external events reflect the inner condition of the souls who participate in them, and that lasting change must begin with transformation at the level of individual consciousness before it can manifest in improved social structures and cultural practices. Their work to heal and inspire individual heroes thus serves the larger purpose of nurturing the kind of leadership that can guide entire societies toward greater wisdom, justice, and compassion. The deep magic that connects all fairy fountains across time and space creates a network of healing and support that operates according to principles far more complex and sophisticated than any mortal communication system, linking not just different locations within a single timeline, but corresponding points across multiple parallel realities and alternate histories. This interconnected web of consciousness allows great fairies to share insights and coordinate their efforts across dimensional boundaries that would normally be impossible to cross, ensuring that the wisdom gained in one timeline becomes available to support heroes and communities in all other timelines as well. The operation of this magical network requires the great fairies to maintain perfect harmony among themselves. Despite the vast differences in their individual personalities, specialties, and approaches to their sacred work, their consciousness functioning as components of a larger intelligence that encompasses the full spectrum of divine love and wisdom. This unity in diversity creates emergent properties that exceed what any individual fairy could accomplish alone, generating insights and capabilities that arise from the interactions between different aspects of fairy nature rather than from the isolated efforts of separate beings. The network also serves as a form of backup system that preserves fairy knowledge and experience even when individual fountains are destroyed or corrupted by dark forces, the collective memory of all great fairies, ensuring that no wisdom is ever truly lost, regardless of what disasters might befall specific locations or individuals. This redundancy provides stability and continuity that enables fairy magic to persist through even the most catastrophic events, ready to re-emerge and resume its healing work whenever conditions permit such restoration. The way that fairy blessings transcend individual lifetimes reflects the deeper truth that love, once given freely and received with genuine gratitude, creates bonds that persist beyond the physical existence of those involved in the original exchange. Heroes who receive fairy blessings carry the effects of that divine touch, not just through their current incarnation, but into subsequent lives and alternate manifestations of their essential nature, the enhancement becoming a permanent part of their spiritual development, rather than a temporary boost to their capabilities. This permanence of fairy gifts operates through mechanisms that connect directly to the eternal aspects of heroic identity, the blessings taking root in the soil of the soul, rather than merely affecting the surface layers of personality and ability that change from incarnation to incarnation. The result is cumulative development that allows each new manifestation of the heroic spirit to begin with advantages that were earned through the struggles and achievements of previous versions, creating an upward spiral of growth and capability that continues across multiple lifetimes. The recognition of this continuity enables great fairies to tailor their gifts not just to the immediate needs of the hero standing before them, but to the long-term development of the eternal spirit they serve. Their blessings designed to nurture qualities and abilities that may not be needed in the current crisis, but will prove essential for challenges that await in future incarnations. This long-term perspective creates blessings that unfold over time, revealing new layers of meaning and capability as the recipient grows in wisdom and spiritual maturity. The promise that fairy magic will exist as long as hope remains in the world represents more than simple optimism or wishful thinking, reflecting instead a fundamental law of existence that connects the persistence of divine love to the presence of souls willing to believe in the possibility of redemption and renewal. Hope itself serves as the medium through which fairy magic operates, the essential ingredient that allows divine power to manifest in forms that can touch and transform the mortal realm without overwhelming the delicate structures of free will and individual choice that makes spiritual growth meaningful. This relationship between hope and fairy magic creates a self-reinforcing cycle that grows stronger rather than weaker as it encounters opposition, each act of faith and courage providing additional fuel for the divine engines that generate healing and transformation throughout creation. The great fairies understand that their power is not diminished by being shared, but is instead amplified through the process of inspiring others to discover their own capacity for hope and love, their blessings serving as catalysts that awaken dormant potential rather than external solutions that replace the need for individual development. The eternal nature of this promise provides comfort and strength to heroes who face challenges that seem too great for any mortal to overcome, assuring them that their efforts are supported by forces that operate on scales far beyond individual lifetimes, and that draw their power from sources that cannot be exhausted or corrupted by any manifestation of darkness. This assurance enables champions to act with courage and determination, even when they cannot see how their immediate actions will contribute to ultimate victory, trusting that their sacrifices serve purposes that extend far beyond their current understanding. The great fairies serve as living embodiments of this eternal promise, their very existence providing evidence that love and compassion possess the kind of permanence and reliability that makes them worthy foundations for faith and hope even in the darkest of circumstances. Through their patient service across countless ages and their unwavering commitment to the principles that define their nature, they demonstrate that some things in existence are indeed eternal, and that the forces of light possess resources and capabilities that dark powers can never fully comprehend or successfully counter. The cyclical patterns that govern fairy magic reflect the deeper rhythms that structure all of creation, the endless dance of expansion and contraction, birth and death, challenge and resolution that provides the framework within which spiritual development becomes possible and meaningful. Each cycle builds upon the achievements of its predecessors while introducing new elements and possibilities that prevent the pattern from becoming sterile repetition, ensuring that growth continues even when it appears that all possibilities have been exhausted and all lessons have been learned. The Great Fairies' understanding of these cycles enables them to work with natural processes rather than against them, timing their interventions to coincide with moments when their influence can have maximum positive impact, while avoiding actions that would interfere with the organic development of the souls and communities they serve. Their wisdom includes knowing when to act and when to wait, when to provide direct assistance, and when to step back and allow heroes to discover their own strength through struggle and challenge. The endless repetition of these cycles might seem monotonous or futile to observers who focus only on surface events, but the fairy perspective reveals that each iteration brings new depths of understanding and new opportunities for the expression of love and creativity that could not have existed without the foundation provided by previous cycles. The eternal return is not mere repetition, but spiral progression that moves through familiar territory while ascending to ever greater heights of wisdom, compassion, and spiritual achievement. The Great Fairies themselves continue to evolve and develop through their participation in these eternal cycles, their consciousness expanding and their capabilities growing as they encounter new forms of heroism and discover new ways to serve the cause of light and healing. They are not static beings who achieved perfection at the moment of their creation, but dynamic expressions of divine love that continue to learn and grow through their interactions with the heroes and communities they serve, their own spiritual development, intertwined with that of the entire cosmos. They help to nurture and protect. This ongoing evolution ensures that fairy magic remains fresh and relevant regardless of how circumstances change or what new challenges arise to test the forces of good. Their adaptability and creativity providing resources that can meet any threat while maintaining perfect alignment with the eternal principles that define their essential nature. The promise of their continued presence thus represents not just the persistence of existing capabilities, but the guarantee of continued growth and development that will generate new solutions and new forms of support as they are needed. In the quiet moments between great crises, when the world enjoys temporary respite from the eternal struggle and heroes rest in preparation for battles yet to come, the Great Fairies gather in consciousness to share their accumulated wisdom and prepare for the challenges they know await in cycles yet to unfold. These gatherings serve not just as planning sessions, but as celebrations of all that has been accomplished and affirmations of faith in all that remains possible. Their joy in service and their love for creation, providing the emotional and spiritual foundation that sustains their work across the vast expanses of time and space that comprise their domain of responsibility. And so our journey through the enchanted realms of the Great Fairies draws to its gentle close, like flower petals settling on still water as twilight embraces the land with colors that have no earthly names, painting the sky in hues that speak of completion and the peaceful satisfaction that comes when all tasks have been fulfilled according to divine will. We have witnessed magic in its purest form, love that transcends mortal understanding and reaches across the boundaries between dimensions to touch hearts that have been prepared through trial and dedication to receive such extraordinary gifts. and wisdom that flows as eternal as the springs themselves, carrying within its currents the accumulated understanding of ages beyond counting. The great fairies continue their timeless vigil, even as our tale reaches its conclusion, their consciousness ever watchful for souls in need of healing and restoration, their laughter like wind chimes in a summer breeze carrying melodies that can mend broken hearts and inspire courage in spirits that have been dimmed by doubt and despair. Their blessings flow as constant as the turning of seasons, available to any who approach with genuine need and pure intention, while their wisdom guides the eternal dance between light and shadow that gives meaning and purpose to every heroic struggle across the vast tapestry of existence. In the sacred fountains where they dwell, where water bubbles up from springs that connect directly to the heart of creation itself, these magnificent beings weave threads of hope and healing into the fabric of reality, their patient work, ensuring that no noble effort is ever truly wasted, and no sacrifice made in love is ever forgotten by the cosmic forces that shape the destiny of all living things. Each blessing they bestow becomes a seed of light planted in the fertile soil of courageous hearts, growing through the seasons of struggle and triumph until it blossoms into the kind of wisdom and compassion that can transform entire worlds. As you drift toward dreams in this quiet hour, when night settles over the land like a gentle blanket woven from starlight and the whispered prayers of all who sleep in peace, carry with you the knowledge that somewhere in the depths of sacred fountains, magnificent beings of pure magic continue their ancient dance of renewal and hope. Let their gentle power wash over you like warm starlight, healing whatever wounds the day has brought to your spirit, restoring whatever strength has been spent in service of purposes greater than yourself, and filling your heart with the quiet certainty that tomorrow will bring new wonders to discover and new opportunities to participate in the eternal work of spreading light and love throughout creation. Their magic touches every corner of existence, flowing through underground rivers of liquid starlight that connect all living things in webs of meaning and purpose that stretch across dimensions beyond mortal comprehension. In dreams and in waking moments, in times of celebration and in hours of sorrow, the influence of fairy blessings continues to work its transformative power, nurturing the seeds of heroism that lie dormant within every soul, until the moment comes when they are needed to bloom into the full flower of courage and compassion. Sleep now in the embrace of fairy magic, knowing that morning will bring new wonders to unfold before your awakening eyes, new possibilities to explore with hands that have been strengthened by rest and hearts that have been refreshed by contact with the eternal wellsprings of divine love. The great fairies will forever stand as guardians of the light that dwells within every noble heart, their presence a constant reminder that no darkness can ever completely extinguish the flame of hope that burns at the center of all existence. Rest well, peaceful dreamer, in the eternal sanctuary of their love, where time moves according to the rhythms of healing, rather than the harsh demands of struggle, where every breath carries the fragrance of flowers that bloom in gardens beyond the reach of earthly seasons, and where the gentle music of flowing water speaks in melodies older than memory of promises that will never be broken and love that will never fade. The great fairies watch over your slumber with the same patient devotion they have shown to heroes across countless ages, their blessings surrounding you with protection, as enduring as the stars themselves and as gentle as the first light of dawn breaking over mountains that have witnessed the eternal triumph of hope over despair, love over hatred, and light over every shadow that has ever dared to challenge the fundamental goodness that underlies all creation in its infinite beauty and endless capacity for renewal and growth.